This is the Bernard Kingdom. Within its borders lie 39 dungeons, teeming with monsters. To maintain peace, a barrier has been erected around the towns and villages. This land is the stage for a fantasy otome game, commonly known as a K-fan. In this world lives Wolfgang Valgans Saboteur, a reincarnated individual. He currently serves as the acting head of the ducal house of Bernard. He understands that he has been reborn into the world of AKA fan as the father of the villainous Louise. He recalls his previous life, where he was a hardcore gamer. He played games of all kinds, including otome games. He remembers that AKA fan was one such game, a romance story where the player could pursue handsome men. As he played, he grew fond of the story and became so invested that he even purchased the supplementary setting materials. He noted that, unlike most otome games, this one was praised for its challenging dungeon-crawling elements. In the game, the player takes on the role of the protagonist, a naive saintess named Monica. The objective was to travel the country, deepening bonds with various love interests while undergoing training. A core part of the story involved venturing into the kingdom's dungeons to suppress monster outbreaks. His own daughter, Louise, was a character in that game. She was destined to oppose Monica, vying for the affection of her fiancé, Crown Prince Hinrich. Ultimately, in the game's finale, Louise was to be condemned by the Crown Prince, her engagement annulled, and she would be exiled from the country. As the villainess, she was fated to be destroyed. But that is a story he cannot accept. Before him, his 4-year-old daughter, Louise Saboteur, cries out for her father, her face streaked with tears. He sees not a villainess, but his child, and knows this is not a future he will allow. She screams her refusal, her small voice echoing through the room. The household staff, Katie and a maid, look on with helpless concern, addressing her as the young mistress, Louise. Her father, Valgans, can only stare, his composure broken as he murmurs her name. He quickly kneels to meet her gaze, his hands held out in a placating gesture. He asks her to calm down, pleading gently for her to explain what is wrong, admitting that he cannot understand otherwise. In response, she strikes him hard across the face. The sharp sound of the slap is followed by a sudden quiet as she collapses against his chest, burying her face in his shirt and beginning to sob. Her heartbroken cries are for her mother. The source of her anguish is now clear. Just 1 month ago, Valgans' wife, Cassandra, succumbed to a widespread illness. As Louise continues to weep for her mother, Valgans touches the stinging red mark on his cheek. Katie and the maids watch with concern, and the old attendant asks if he is all right. Valgans can only utter Katie's name in response. Nearby, Katie remarks to another maid about the terrible state of affairs, but then adds with a sigh that one cannot truly blame a child for their actions in such a situation. He stands with his head bowed, the red mark on his face a stark reminder of his daughter's pain. From behind, Katie's voice is gentle as he explains that it is surely difficult for the young mistress to accept Lady Cassandra's death. Valgans looks up slightly, acknowledging his attendant. His expression hardens with resolve. As Louise is carried away down the hall, still looking back with tear-filled eyes, Valgans declares that he will be the one to go to her. It is, he states, a promise he made to Katie. This decision defies convention. It is exceedingly rare for the head of a noble house to personally raise their child after the mother has passed away. The man he was in the game, the original Wolfgang, kept his distance from the grieving Louise, leaving her to suffer alone. But he is not the Wolfgang from the game. He remembers this now, a memory that returned to him only recently, around the time his daughter was born. Standing firm in the hallway, he calls out her name with newfound purpose, Ruru. His voice echoes through the vast, ornate, and silent corridor of the grand mansion, a declaration of intent in the lonely space. He searched frantically, realizing Louise was not in the mansion. A 4-year-old, all alone, his heart pounded. Could she be in the garden? His eyes widened with alarm as he rushed outside. He found her there, standing silently amidst the rose bushes, a place her mother had also loved. A wave of relief washed over him. He recalled how suddenly Cassandra had been taken from them, leaving Louise so terribly lonely. He called out her nickname, Ruru, but as she turned, her face was not sad, but contorted with rage. Mother's house is gone, she screamed, her small voice filled with anguish. Her sudden outburst sent a shock wave through him. He lunged forward, his glasses flying from his face and clattering onto the stone path. Louise stared up at him, her anger momentarily replaced by wide-eyed surprise. He stumbled to his knees before her, the carefully constructed dam of his own grief finally breaking. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at his daughter. Confused, she could only whisper, "Father." His mind flashed back to a conversation with Cassandra. She had gently dismissed his cynical view of their world, telling him it wasn't some game, and their union wasn't merely a political marriage. The memory brought a fresh wave of pain. Hunched over, he choked out a single, agonizing question, why? He remembered her smile, radiant and full of life. She had told him that none of his circumstances mattered. She had fallen in love with him. He was precious to her. She had called him Val. That smile was like a sunflower, always bright and warm. He saw her in the garden, her joy infectious, her presence a constant light in his life. He saw it all again. Their wedding day, her hand in his, the moment she held their newborn daughter, Louise, her face glowing with love. A devastating realization struck him as his hand reached for the phantom image. The day she smiled for him would never come again. He remains kneeling, head bowed in sorrow, as his daughter Louise reaches out and gently places her small hand on his hair. Startled, he looks up, his face streaked with tears. Louise, her own eyes welling up, calls him by her nickname for him, Ruru, before tearfully apologizing to her father. She confesses that she had thought he wasn't sad that her mother was gone. Her words trigger a painful memory of the funeral, where he stood stoically while his young daughter wept, unable to show his own grief at their party. Returning to the present, Valgans explains to Louise that on the day of the farewell, many guests were present, and that some of them were bad people. Louise looks up at him, surprised by this revelation. He recalls the immense pressure he faced. After Katie's funeral, factions sought to take advantage of the Saboteur family situation. As the acting duke, it was imperative to maintain appearances and show no weakness. He continues his explanation to Louise, telling her that to protect them from those people, he had to pretend he was fine. He acknowledges that to her, he must have seemed like a cold father. With a gentle smile, he reassures her that it's all right, and she doesn't need to understand yet, as it's his job to handle such things. He then scoops her up, announcing they're going to his secret room. As he carries her on his back, she asks about this secret room, and he playfully tells her to hold on tight. He carries her through a doorway into a grand bedroom. Louise gasps in wonder, her eyes wide as she takes in the sight. The walls are covered in framed portraits. The portraits are all of her mother, Cassandra. One captures a tender moment of her holding a newborn baby, while another is a formal portrait of her smiling gently. Nearby, one of her elegant dresses stands on a mannequin. She looks around the room in awe, exclaiming that there are so many portraits of her mother. Her father, Valgans, watches her with a gentle expression, admitting with a soft smile that he regrets not bringing her here sooner, explaining he was a bit embarrassed. Hearing this, she turns to him with a questioning look, asking why he would be embarrassed. He clarifies, arms crossed and slightly flustered, that he is the one who painted every portrait in the room. Her eyes widen in disbelief as she asks if he truly painted all of them. He confirms her question, stating that yes, he did. Completely amazed, she breathes out that it's incredible. Her praise makes him flustered, and he quickly dismisses his own work, insisting that his paintings are not very good. She turns her gaze back to the portraits, her expression softening as she murmurs that it feels as though her mother is still there in the house with them. Her words strike him, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. The surprise quickly melts into a warm, heartfelt smile. He then explains that while he was often compelled to paint for various reasons, he always loved painting Cassandra. He shows her the first one he did after she was born, a portrait of her mother holding her as an infant. He then offers her a choice. She can have one of the existing paintings for her room, or he could paint a new, smaller one just for her. Overjoyed, she exclaims her excitement at the idea. She eagerly asks about a small painting, and he suggests a canvas tiny enough for her to carry. As he considers it, another idea strikes him. A locket pendant would also be a wonderful way to keep her mother's image close. He continues to think aloud, expressing his desire for both her and Katie to always have a portrait of Cassandra with them. He ponders the difficulty of painting on such a small scale for a locket, wondering if it's even possible in this world. As he contemplates this, Louise, gazing at a large portrait, quietly asks her father why he and her mother are not together. She looks up at her father with wide, earnest eyes, insisting that it would be best if he and her mother were pictured side by side. Valgans, caught slightly off guard, tells her not to complain if his self-portrait turns out poorly, to which she gives a firm, determined nod. Following her firm response, Valgans' expression softens. He tells her that while he has apologized to her, he wonders if there is anyone else he needs to apologize to. After a moment of quiet contemplation, Louise confirms that there is. He smiles gently and instructs her to wait for him in his office once he is finished with his work. With a bright, enthusiastic yes, she turns and toddles happily down the long corridor. As she departs, Valgans settles into his study. The door soon opens and Katie enters, offering coffee. Valgans accepts with thanks as Katie informs him that Louise is being looked after by the maids in the drawing room. The older man notes that everyone was worried about her, but causing them trouble is part of their work. He turns his attention to the documents on his desk, his thoughts drifting. He reflects on his deep-seated dislike for simply enduring hardship, a feeling carried over for his past life as a Japanese man from a fallen noble house. All he truly desires is to live a peaceful life, free from such tension. His reverie is interrupted by Katie, who mentions having guided Louise to the room of memories, the one filled with her mother's portraits. Valgans looks up and agrees with a soft smile. Katie adds how happy the child was, suggesting it would have been better to show her the room sooner. Katie continues, observing that it seems his young master has finally been able to process some of his own feelings. Valgans looks up, slightly irritated, and chides the older man for calling him Buchan, reminding him that he's been told not to many times. Katie offers a quick apology. The conversation triggers a memory, and the world dissolves into a soft, hazy light. A gentle voice echoes from the past, asking, "Oh, what is it, Val?" The memory sharpens, revealing Cassandra, frail but smiling, lying in bed as a tiny Louise sleeps soundly beside her. Cassandra greets Valgans, who has just arrived. He asks if she's been sleeping and eating properly. She gently tells him not to worry, as he is the one who always pushes himself too hard. Her gaze drifts to their sleeping daughter. Cassandra's voice, full of affection, clarifies that she isn't the one overexerting herself. He is. He listened, his face etched with sorrow, as Cassandra's voice reached him from the bed. She confessed her deep worry, certain that if she were to pass away, he would try to follow her immediately. Tears streamed down his face as she gently called him a crybaby. Through his grief, he managed a small protest, insisting that he only ever cried in front of her. She then asked him to come closer, her expression soft but serious. She had a request to make. As he leaned over the bed, Cassandra implored him not to speak of dying. She reminded him that even if she were gone, he must not leave their precious Ruru alone. She spoke of their promise to go on a picnic together in the spring, her hand resting gently on their sleeping daughter. He listened, his heart heavy, as she continued, asking that they watch over Ruru's growth together. Her voice called his name again, a simple, gentle plea. Val. Her gaze shifted to their sleeping child as she made her true request clear. Protect this child. She explained that soon, Ruru would have no one but him. With her last strength, she made him swear to protect their daughter. It was a promise, sealed in a moment of profound loss and enduring love. The painful memory faded, replaced by the sound of a door opening in the present. Louise entered her father's study, greeting him cheerfully. Valgans looked up from his work, a warm smile replacing the sorrow of his recollection. With her cheeks puffed out from eating, she proudly announced that she had properly apologized to Christoph, saying she was very sorry. Both Valgans and Katie looked on with gentle approval. Beaming with pride, she declares her intention to study hard so she could be of help to her father. Her words strike Valgans, who looks at her with profound emotion. He smiles gently, telling her that she's grown up yet again, and thanks her for the sentiment. He then suggests they have some juice first, noting that Christoph likely prepared some for her after all her running around. As if on cue, Christoph presents her with a glass, and Louise's eyes light up as she exclaims in delight. As she looks up at him, Valgans is struck by how adorable she is. A painful thought follows. He is slowly starting to forget Cassandra's face. He recalls his promise to his late wife, that if Louise were ever to walk a path of ruin, he would use any means necessary to shatter that fate. Solidifying his resolve, he calls out to his daughter, inviting her to come to him. His expression is one of pure, unwavering affection. She responds instantly, running gleefully into his open arms and leaping forward for an embrace. In a sunlit garden, a governess gently instructs young Louise on proper etiquette. She explains that when one is seated, they should be approached from the left. Louise, looking up with wide, curious eyes, repeats the instruction as a question, confirming she understands. Watching from a nearby table, Valgans is overcome with affection. He rests his chin on his hand, a blush dusting his cheeks and a wide, doting smile spreading across his face as he observes his daughter. His companion, a young man with reddish-brown hair, points out the embarrassing look on his brother's face, warning him not to let others see it. Valgans asks what he means. The young man, introduced as Marcus Lehman, his 17-year-old younger brother, remarks that Valgans is as infatuated with Ruru as ever. He dismisses the concern, stating it's fine since no one else is around, and continues to admire how cute Louise is. Marcus then sobers the mood, reminding Valgans that since their parents died in an accident 10 years ago, the two of them are the only close blood relatives left. The younger brother clears his throat, his expression turning serious. He acknowledges that Ruru is cute enough to make one's eyes pop, but asks Valgans to adopt a more serious demeanor. He explains that he came today because he has a request for his older brother. His gaze now focused, Valgans sips from his cup and prompts Marcus to continue. After a brief hesitation, Marcus brings up the matter of the succession to the head of the house. His voice rises with frustration as he demands to know why Valgans is merely the acting duke. He declares that he, Marcus, is the official successor to the Lehman dukedom. Valgans remains perfectly calm, taking another sip of his drink. The rules of their family's succession are laid out. As long as the younger brother and heir is a minor, his guardian serves as the acting head. When Marcus comes of age at 18, he will become the duke, and Wolfgang will inherit their father's lesser title of earl. Valgans looks directly at his brother, stating that Marcus should already know the answer. He then poses a pointed question. Why didn't their parents allow him, the eldest son, to inherit the dukedom? He looks away, flustered, and admits it's because Valgans can't use magic, or rather, that he possesses so much it's beyond his control. Then, with a look of shame, Marcus makes a shocking confession. He can't use magic at all. In this kingdom, those of royal and noble blood are revered for their high magic levels, which allow them to wield advanced and powerful spells. This reverence placed immense expectations upon Valgans. As a child, he was recognized as a saint for his exceptional magic reserves. Yet, despite this potential, he could not cast even the most rudimentary barrier spell. By the age of 10, it was concluded that while he possessed magic, his very constitution prevented him from using it. Marcus elaborated on the consequences of that diagnosis. He explained that because Valgans couldn't use magic, their parents had no choice but to conceive another child to inherit the dukedom. Him. Since their father's death, Valgans had been acting as the head of the Lehman dukedom for over a decade. He continued, his expression earnest, conveying the people's anxiety. They were unsettled by the prospect of such a sudden change in leadership, with him taking over from the brother they had known as their lord for so long. Despite the gravity of the topic, Valgans remained composed as they sat for tea. He calmly informed Marcus that he had no intention of handing over all duties at once, planning instead for a gradual transition over the next 2 or 3 years. At his words, Louise abruptly turned from her seat, calling out, "Uncle." Her call drew their attention. Valgans asked if her studies were finished for the day. Louise affirmed they were, then announced she had come to greet her uncle, who was visiting. With a flourish of her skirt, she performed a perfect curtsy. The charming gesture completely disarmed both men. Valgans and Marcus beamed with identical, foolishly proud smiles, a doting father and a doting uncle utterly captivated by her cuteness. Seeing their expressions, Louise asked what they had been discussing. Marcus replied with a gentle smile, telling her they were just talking about how amazing her father was, even without being able to use magic. Her attention shifted to her father. "You're not a mage, Papa?" she asked. Valgans paused thoughtfully before explaining that while he couldn't use magic in the traditional sense, it wasn't entirely unrelated to him. He had a special constitution, a fact that was discovered when he was a student. He possessed what were known as magic eyes. This power, a flame vision, dwelled within his sight, a consciousness that could erupt without warning. As the conversation continues, Marcus explains the situation to Louise with a frustrated expression. He clarifies that while his brother's flames are generated by magical power, they aren't considered true magic, which is why he isn't called a magic user. Louise, her eyes wide with concern, absorbs this complicated distinction. Meanwhile, Valgans adjusts his glasses, a slight smile on his face. He reflects internally on his power, recalling how the mere sight of it felt unsettlingly like being burned. It had first manifested when he was 17, and though he could now mostly control its activation, he still couldn't do without his magic-blocking glasses. His thoughts are interrupted as Louise speaks up hesitantly, her small fist clenched. She quietly asks if it would be all right for her to pretend to be the one using magic, a suggestion that catches Valgans by surprise. She elaborates with childish enthusiasm, explaining that if she pretends, everyone will think her father is amazing. She imagines using a rod like a magic user from a picture book. Marcus, initially stunned, lights up at the idea. He exclaims that it's a brilliant plan, suggesting that if she performs well, it could even pass for high-level, incantationless magic. Overwhelmed by his daughter's earnest desire to help him, Valgans covers his mouth, tears welling in his eyes. He thinks she is the best daughter in the world for trying so hard on his behalf. From the side, Marcus urges his emotional older brother to get a grip. Louise, full of confidence, winks and declares that she'll come up with a cool, flashy pose. Marcus, however, thoughtfully points out a practical issue. She doesn't normally carry a magic rod, and the act wouldn't be convincing without one. He then proposes a new plan. They will immediately begin a conference to decide on a cool pose for Valgans to use when activating his magic eyes. While Louise looks determined, Valgans is mortified by the idea, thinking how embarrassing it would be to strike a pose now. Marcus encourages his brother with a grin, saying it's a fine idea since Louise is so motivated. He suggests they should just play along for the sake of those they've been deceiving. Valgans glances away, still looking uncomfortable but seemingly considering it. With the matter seemingly settled, Marcus cheerfully adds that this will restore the family's honor and allow Valgans to succeed as Duke. At this, Valgans' demeanor shifts entirely. He sternly cuts his brother off, stating that it's out of the question and that he won't forgive this bad Marcus. Louise looks up, calling out to her father in confusion. The scene shifts, revealing the original context from the game Valgans remembers. In that story, the character Wolfgang took back the title of Duke from his younger brother. The Duke's daughter in that version was named Louise Lehman. Several days later, Marcus playfully teased Valgans, remarking that with such doting affection for Louise, he would surely become a fine Duke. Valgans, looking weary, could only manage a tired smile as his daughter happily greeted her uncle. He found himself at a social gathering, where several noble women commented on the advancements within the Sauna territory. Countess Muller noted that she had heard of their lands, while Countess Becker specifically mentioned the innovative water pumps designed by the Sauna family. Countess Foyhito expressed her surprise, confirming that these rumors were indeed true. Valgans listened with a strained, polite smile. He mused that the memories of his past life did occasionally prove useful. The tea party, hosted by Louise, was underway. A young girl, identified as 6-year-old Emma Fischer, the daughter of a marquis, cheerfully asked if everyone could go play in the garden. Her mother, Countess Fischer, readily agreed, reminding the young ladies to be careful not to soil their clothes. The children, including Emma, responded with a resounding, happy affirmation. Turning to her father, Louise announced she was going off to play. Valgans waved her on with a warm smile, telling her to have fun. As he watched her go, the noble women's attention shifted back to him. They cooed over how cute both girls were, remarking on how wonderful it was that their fathers doted on them. The comments left Valgans momentarily stunned. His expression tightened as a realization struck him. He was at a gathering for young girls. It was highly unusual for a man to participate in such an event, and he suddenly felt a profound sense of unease. Elsewhere, Countess Fischer explained to her husband that she had hoped to create an opportunity for him and Valgans to speak, as Valgans had come as Louise's attendant. She then noticed her husband's wandering gaze and sharply told him to stop looking away from Lady Louise. His unease grew as he found himself seated at the table with the women, feeling completely out of place. He couldn't comprehend why he had been maneuvered into this position. The conversation then took a more serious turn. The women confessed that they had been truly worried about him after Lady Cassandra's death, suggesting that he had fallen into a deep state of despair. She and the other ladies observed him with sympathetic eyes. Countess Fischer then spoke, telling Valgans that she had always admired the deeply affectionate relationship he shared with his late wife. He offered a gentle smile, touched by their concern. He thanked them, explaining that 2 years had passed and he had finally begun to feel settled. It was kind of them, he thought, to have been looking out for him. His reassurance, however, did not deter the other countesses. Whispering behind their fans, one noted that at 6 years old, Louise must still be lonely, while another added that Lord Santa himself was still quite young. As he sipped his tea, their true intentions became painfully clear. He understood now. They were attempting to arrange a marriage. He wondered how he could possibly navigate the situation, knowing that for a nobleman, choosing not to remarry was hardly an option. Attempting to deflect, Countess Fischer asked about his hobbies. Valgans replied that his late wife Cassandra's paintings had become a source of comfort, and for now, he was content to simply watch over things. His comments sparked a flurry of unexpected excitement. The ladies exclaimed that they had never heard Lord Sonder painted and eagerly asked to see his work. A nervous sweat formed on his brow as he realized his mistake. He had dug his own grave. He quickly tried to backtrack, waving his hands dismissively. He insisted it was merely amateur work, not something fit to be shown to others. Unfazed, Countess Fischer proposed that the next tea party be held at the Sonder estate. Before he could argue, a deafening crash shattered the afternoon's tranquility. Valgans's head snapped up, his expression instantly shifting from social discomfort to sharp alarm as the ladies gasped in shock. The source of the chaos was a massive, winged beast that had descended upon the terrace. Near its talons, young Emma Fischer cried out for her mother. In the background, Marcus was already drawing his sword. Panic erupted. Countess Fischer screamed her daughter's name as the creature loomed over the terrified child. Valgans stared in disbelief, his mind identifying the flying monster and questioning how it could possibly be here. Panic erupts as a griffin swoops down, snatching Emma Fischer into the air. Her mother, Countess Fischer, cries out to Valgans in terror. He warns her against using magic, explaining it would be too risky and could endanger Emma. The Countess can only watch in horror as her daughter is carried higher into the sky. He steps forward with grim determination, his gaze fixed on the sky. He assures the distraught mother to leave everything to him. As the griffin soars higher, a nearby guard notes that a fall from that height would be a great injury. He addresses Valgans as the black-haired escort knight and orders him to wait for the monster to land. He ignores the guard's assessment, instead issuing a sharp command of his own. "Catch Miss Emma." The guard, though startled by the order, snaps to attention and acknowledges it. High above, the terrified child cries for help. Valgans removes his glasses, his focus absolute. He understands that his magic can be precise. He can burn only his intended target, incinerating the monster without harming Emma at all. With his decision made, he raises a hand toward the sky, his expression cold and resolute. A single word escapes his lips. Burn. The command unleashes a torrent of fire that instantly engulfs the griffin. The creature lets out a final, piercing shriek as its body is consumed by the flames, leaving Emma to fall from the sky. As the girl plummets towards the ground, the guard sprints forward, launching himself into the air to intercept her just moments before impact. He lands safely, cradling the crying child who calls out for a mother. Countess Fischer rushes to them, embracing her daughter. Valgans watches the reunion, relieved that Emma is safe and that his display of power seems to have gone largely unnoticed. His momentary relief, however, shatters in an instant. A dreadful realization dawns on him. Louise is gone. He frantically calls her nickname. Ruru, where are you? He fears something must have happened to her even before the monster was caught. His heart pounding with terror, he screams his daughter's nickname. Ruru. He frantically demands a reply, his voice cracking with the fear that she has vanished from his side. His eyes dart around the garden, searching desperately through the foliage. His frantic search ends as he finds Louise trembling behind his leg. A wave of relief washes over his face as he crouches down, asking gently if she is unhurt. He reassures her that it's all right now, as the monster has been defeated. She peeks out from her hiding spot, her fear completely replaced by wide-eyed wonder. Her eyes literally sparkle with stars as she exclaims how incredibly cool it all was. She turns to him, waving enthusiastically and giving a thumbs up. She praises him, declaring that he really showed that monster what for. Valgans looks on, slightly bewildered by her energetic reaction. Her praise continues as she beams, calling him super cool, before wrapping her arms around his neck in a tight hug. She tells him she wants to be a daughter he can be proud of. Visibly moved, Valgans smiles warmly and tells her how happy that makes him. Holding Louise securely in his arms, he surveys the scene. The ground is deeply scorched where the griffin fell. He wonders why a monster from a mountain dungeon would appear in the capital. Nearby, Lord Fischer and his entourage look on as Louise, clinging to her father, calls out formally, "Lord Saboteur." Lord Fischer approaches, his expression a mixture of panic and gratitude. Valgans addresses him formally, and Lord Fischer quickly responds, thanking him for his help and urgently asking for a moment of his time. He begins his explanation with a horrifying revelation. At his own estate, another monster had appeared, a massive, shadowy wolf-like beast. It had attacked his eldest daughter, Lena. The news shocks Valgans, who exclaims, "Another one?" Lord Fischer confirms the grim reality, explaining that he was in the middle of dealing with the attack at his home when he received a report that a second monster had appeared in this very garden. He gestures towards the scorched earth. Lord Fischer concludes that because the nobles here were occupied fighting the Griffin, he was able to proceed to his own estate without hesitation to deal with the other threat. He watches as his daughter, Louise, firmly addresses the distraught Lord Fischer. She tells the man to raise his head, insisting that as long as the young ladies are safe, all is well. She points out that had Lord Sana not been present, the outcome for either Lena or Emma might have been much worse. Lord Fischer, still bowed, reports that according to the doctor's examination, both girls' injuries are minor and will not leave any scars. The news visibly relieves Valgans. His mind races as he recognizes the situation. This was a key event from the main story of the game. He recalls that Emma Fischer was a support character who, in that original timeline, was left with a large permanent scar on her face. He remembers more details from the game's lore. If a player grew close to Emma, she would reveal that she was attacked by a monster in the Garden of the Six Towers, causing her to fall from a high place. She had always considered herself lucky just to have survived. The pieces fall into place. In the game, another noble girl was attacked by a different monster on the same day, losing a leg and her spirit. The game's version of Wolfgang hadn't attended the tea party, leading to poor coordination with Lord Fischer. As a result, only one of the girls was spared from severe injury. His presence here changed everything. The profound realization strikes him. His actions can alter the future. He grips Louise's shoulders, his expression intense, startling her. In the distance, Countess Fischer calls out to Emma, while Lena calls for Louise. Emma runs toward them, wiping tears from her eyes and insisting she's fine. Her mother, Countess Fischer, follows and expresses her deepest gratitude to Valgans, stating that his timely use of magic prevented a terrible disaster. He offers a gentle, reassuring smile, humbly stating that he lacks the confidence to make calm judgments whenever Louise is in danger. The Fischers look upon him with sincere appreciation. Though it is an alarming state of affairs for monsters to appear so close to the capital, within a noble's own estate, the current mood is one of overwhelming relief. For now, everyone is simply grateful for the two young ladies' safety. Valgans watches them, a thought beginning to form. And so, he feels he has managed to see a small glimmer of light in his daughter's future. As if sensing this newfound hope, Louise closes her eyes and smiles, a picture of pure, serene relief. Lord and Countess Fischer bowed deeply, their heads lowered in respect. The Lord expresses his immense gratitude for the events that have transpired. In response, Valgans gestures emphatically, urging them to raise their heads. He insists that they need not go so far, as he was merely fulfilling his duty as the Duke's representative and they had already offered their thanks. From her seat on a plush sofa, Louise listens as Countess Fischer turns to her, apologizing sincerely for the frightening experience she had to endure. The Countess then suggests that perhaps Louise would like to see Emma and Lena. The Countess's words reach her own daughter, Emma, who is now full of energy. The young girl eagerly declares that she wants to go to Louise's house to play, insisting that she won't be a bother. Lord Fischer then recounts the harrowing details, explaining that by the time he arrived to help, Lena was already being attacked by the monster. He reflects that had he panicked while using his magic to fight back, the situation would have become far more dire. He looks over with admiration, calling Louise a strong-willed and good child. Valgans adjusts his glasses with a smirk, remarking that this sounds like a doting parent's bias. He then adds with competitive amusement that when it comes to doting, he won't be outdone. His attention returns to his daughter. He informs Louise that Lena is now married, and mentions that it seems Louise had greeted Lena alongside Katie sometime in the past. The thought triggers a memory for Valgans. He pictures his late wife, Cassandra, embracing a younger Louise, remarking how envious she was that Louise would have an older sister figure. The young Louise had then asked for a big sister of her own. The memory brings a pained and embarrassed flush to Valgans' face. Across the room, Lord and Countess Fischer quietly converse, agreeing that once things have settled, they should invite the Saboteur family to visit. They know both Emma and Lena would be delighted. Valgans overhears the whispers of other nobles, now referring to him as the Baron of the Sauna house who subjugated a monster and expressing a desire to have tea with him and his wife. The unwanted attention makes him grimace. From below, Louise gazes up at him, her eyes sparkling with admiration as she declares that her father is cool and she won't let anyone else have it. As the conversation with the Fischers continues, Valgans shifts the topic. With a gentle smile, he asks Lord Fischer if the reason for the monster's appearance has been discovered. The monster attack on the Fischer estate was an incident that shook the entire nation. Their residence is located near the royal capital, an area protected by a powerful barrier, making the infiltration of a monster into a noble's home a matter of grave concern. Lord Fischer's expression turns serious. He explains that after a swift investigation, they discovered that one of the estate's barrier stones had been broken. He clarifies further, stating it would be more accurate to say it was deliberately destroyed by someone. The revelation hits Valgans with full force, his eyes widening in shock as he processes the implication of a targeted attack. Barrier stones are magical artifacts that contain and project power to ward off monsters. In a country where such creatures are plentiful, it is common practice for noble families to install smaller, localized barrier stones within their own estates for added protection. Valgans realizes this means the Fischer family was specifically targeted. Lord Fischer confirms his suspicion, adding that an emergency noble assembly has been called for the next day, where he will report the sabotage. Seeing Louise's anxious expression, Countess Fischer gently suggests they postpone the serious talk. Lord Fischer quickly agrees, apologizing for worrying the little girl. He then turns to Valgans with a warm, reassuring smile, telling him not to worry either, because they have Valgans and Louise on their side. Valgans returns the smile, grateful for the show of solidarity. Later, Christoph assists Valgans, helping him into the formal, dark military jacket required for his official duties. He remarks that while Valgans's everyday attire is good, the formal uniform suits him exceptionally well. Valgans brushes off the compliment, complaining that the stiff uniform only makes his shoulders sore. Christoph then informs him that Louise is awake early, prompting Valgans to call for her to come in. The door clicks open and Louise peeks inside, wishing her father a good morning. With a small leap, she runs and throws herself into his arms for a tight hug. He and Christoph were startled by the sight of Louise peeking from behind a door. With her hands covering her mouth in surprise, she asked what was wrong, noting that her father's clothes were different from his usual attire. He explained with a smile that he hadn't worn this uniform much before, as he had to go to the castle today. With puffed cheeks, Louise shook her head, asking if she couldn't accompany him. Her pout quickly melted into a radiant smile. She confessed that she was just taken aback because he looked so handsome in his uniform. The compliment struck him with overwhelming force. Tears of pure joy streamed down his face as he clutched his head, thinking his daughter was simply too adorable. Christoph observed the display with a perfectly neutral expression. After composing himself, he listened as Louise earnestly encouraged him to do his best at his work. She promised that she, in turn, would do her best so that Emma and Lena could feel at ease. He smiled warmly, touched by her words. Placing a hand over his heart, he promised he would be back and turned to depart. Louise watched him go, her expression now serious and resolute. His carriage sped along the road. In the Bernhard Kingdom, a noble's influence and right to speak are directly proportional to their magical power. With this power comes the solemn duty to fight monsters. Only a select few of the great noble houses possess enough magical energy to maintain the large-scale barrier stones that protect the nation. Those who hold such immense power are known as saints and saintesses. These chosen few are responsible for touring the country each year to replenish the magic of the great barrier stones. Valgans himself is a saint, a fact he has known since childhood and for which he has trained his entire life. As he rode, he stared out the window with determination. The protection of the people and the country itself depended on the indispensable existence of the saints and saintesses. The carriage finally arrived at the royal castle. When a major incident occurs, the heads of all noble houses are summoned to an assembly. As Valgan strode into the grand hall, already filled with his peers, a voice called out, announcing his arrival. Acting Duke Lehman, he is immediately approached by a familiar, if unwelcome, face. Duke Peter Burnt greets him with a wide smile, noting that it has been a while. Peter observes that Valgans is present as the acting representative for the Lehman Duchy and playfully asks when they last met, chiding him for so rarely attending such gatherings. He internally seethes, recognizing the man as the head of the Burnt ducal house, a man he finds utterly distasteful. Socializing is a chore he despises. Peter, oblivious, continues amiably, suggesting Valgans call him Pevel, as he does privately. He then expresses a mock sadness that with Valgans's brilliant younger brother set to inherit, his chances to meet with the Lehman representative will surely dwindle. He forces a tight, strained smile. The man has been pestering him like this ever since their days at the academy. When Peter asks if he's correct in his assumptions, Valgans can only grit his teeth and agree that he is not mistaken. As a herald's horn sounds in the background, signaling the start of the proceedings, Peter leans in closer. He feigns concern, asking if it isn't lonely for Valgans to be merely the acting representative. He ignores the jab, his gaze sweeping over the assembly hall as the other nobles begin to settle. The meeting is starting, Lord Burnt, he states flatly. Shouldn't you be taking your seat? As he turns to find his own place, Peter waves cheerfully from behind him, calling out that they should meet again after the conference. Valgans's irritation spikes. What an insufferable loudmouth, he thinks, especially after he went to the trouble of capturing such a rare specimen. He clenches his fist in frustration. His mind is made up. As soon as this meeting is over, he will find Peter and leave immediately. However, before he can move, a guard's voice booms through the chamber, announcing the arrival of His Majesty, the King. The assembled nobles rise in unison as the grand doors swing open. The king strides purposefully through the hall, ascending the steps to the ornate throne at its head. Taking his seat, the monarch looks out over the silent assembly and speaks, his voice clear and commanding, "Raise your heads." He begins by addressing the reason for the urgent summons, the recent demonic incursion at the Fischer estate. An investigation, he he announces, has determined that the boundary stone at the Fischer residence was destroyed by human hands. Consequently, he has commanded that the boundary stones of every noble house be inspected. His words cause a stir among the nobles. Valgans listens with sharp focus as the king reveals a more alarming discovery. Boundary stones at several other houses were also found destroyed. Furthermore, all the affected families reported that their area locks, the magical barriers protecting the stones, were functioning normally. Valgans's eyes narrow. This was not an isolated incident targeting only the Fischer family. He processes the implications, realizing the situation is far more dire than expected. The area lock is a powerful magical tool, rendering the area within its scope impervious to all forms of attack. The boundary stones are meant to be protected by this very magic. For a culprit to destroy a stone, they would first have to disable the area lock itself, a feat that should be impossible. As the king continues his explanation, two nobles provide a demonstration. The method for disabling an area lock, he clarifies, is chosen by each house upon installation. While many methods exist, a common one is a wind magic seal, which can be undone by a specific song, its melody acting as a key. A murmur of understanding and concern ripples through the assembly. The king elaborates that these disarming methods are typically passed down orally within the family to ensure secrecy, with a failsafe to reset the lock should the designated heir be lost. Valgans's mind works furiously. If only one house's secret had been leaked, it would be a simple matter of espionage. But for multiple houses to be targeted simultaneously suggests a conspiracy of unimaginable scale. How could one entity possibly acquire so many different, closely guarded secrets? The king's voice cuts through the tension. He declares that there are no discernible patterns or connections among the victimized houses, and the motive remains a mystery. He looks out at the assembled nobility, urging them to report anything, no matter how small, that they might have noticed. A heavy silence hangs in the hall. In a grand assembly hall, a young nobleman raises his hand to be recognized. Begging your pardon, he begins, introducing himself as Baron Hoffman. He explains that while speaking with other victims, he noticed a common thread and felt compelled to report it. Continuing his testimony, he recounts that during a routine replacement of an area lock, the merchant who delivered the new device made a peculiar statement. The Baron's words trigger a memory for Lord Fischer, who recalls a merchant telling him that something very good would happen to him. As murmurs spread through the assembly, Lord Fischer sharply calls for silence, declaring that a merchant's turn of phrase has no bearing on the proceedings. The king, presiding over the meeting, dismisses the issue entirely. He instructs those with no further business to confirm the status of their families and declares the assembly adjourned. As the nobles begin to disperse, Peter Burnt approaches Valgans, correcting a nearby lord by stating Valgans is the acting representative for the Sonov family, not the Fischer or Lehman families. Burnt leans in, confiding in Valgans that he remembers being told that same strange phrase by a merchant when an area lock was delivered to his estate. At the time, he had simply dismissed it as a peculiar saying that was in vogue. The connection hits Valgans with exaggerated shock. Burnt cheerfully confirms it, prompting a flustered Valgans to ask if he's all right, considering his engagement was recently broken. Annoyed, Valgans then demands to know why Burnt didn't mention this crucial piece of information sooner. He smirks, admitting he wanted to savor the amusing situation a bit longer before revealing his hand. Now, he announces he's off to do a little information gathering. Valgans is left sputtering, wondering who could possibly be orchestrating such a widespread plot. With a jaunty wave, Burnt bids Valgans farewell, promising to see him at the next evening party. Valgans can only watch him go, his expression tight with frustration. Nearby, Lord Fischer observes with a smile, remarking that Burnt is as boisterous as ever. Valgans flushes slightly, realizing his irritation must be clearly visible. He worries that Lord Fischer has noticed how openly emotional he is being about the man acting as the ducal representative. He asks Lord Fischer if his feelings were that obvious, but the older man simply smiles and says he doesn't see it that way. Valgans then explains his vexation. A former classmate from his academy days, a man named Klegel, is involved with the ducal representative. He decided on a course of action. Marcus would attend the next evening party alone, while he himself would delay giving the Bunter earldom an answer for as long as possible. With their business concluded, he told Peter Burnt they likely wouldn't see each other for some time. Later, at the Cassandra residence, Peter Burnt relaxed with a cup of tea, recounting a conversation he'd had at the Lehman ducal residence. He recalled asking the Duke's representative, "I wonder if you're listening?" As he spoke, Christoph approached to offer a refill of his black tea. Peter, momentarily pulled from his story, accepted with a gracious smile and a word of thanks. Listening to the account from his seat, Valgans's eyes narrowed slightly. A detail in the story felt strange, out of place. He sat across from his guest in the drawing room, leaning forward slightly as he processed the information Peter had shared. In a separate conversation, Marcus Lehman provided Valgans with the information he had gathered. He explained that he had spoken with Klegel, a prominent student at the academy who apparently returns home on his days off. Marcus added that he had heard the term area lock from one of his teachers. The boy's expression turned grave as he voiced his fears. If their territory's barrier were to be broken, a monster attack would be disastrous, as they are entirely dependent on its protection. The weight of this vulnerability settled heavily on Valgans. He ran the facts through his mind again, his hand touching his temple in thought. The victims had no common link. The merchants involved were all different, and the territories were spread far apart. Investigating each one directly seemed like an impossibly daunting task. Just then, Marcus offered another critical detail. The area locks are created by the Mages Guild, and merchants then purchase them to sell to nobles across the entire country. The distribution method struck Valgans with the force of a revelation. His eyes widened as he seized upon the missing piece, the transporters. He quickly reasoned that the guild must use transporters to deliver the devices to the various merchants. He turned to Marcus, a new urgency in his voice, and asked a pivotal question. Even if the merchants are different, is it not possible they all use the same transportation service? He instructs Marcus to get confirmation through the academy headmaster, adding that he himself will try to contact Fischer and Burnt by letter. Marcus readily agrees to the task. Meanwhile, Peter Burnt sits comfortably in Valgan's drawing room, accepting a cup of tea from Christoph. He muses aloud that he was mistaken to think Valgans would turn him away, complimenting the excellent tea. Valgans, in his study, reads Burnt's letter with growing irritation. He had told Burnt to reply by letter, yet the man came in person anyway. He thinks to himself that Burnt is far too busy to be making such a trip. He lets out a heavy sigh, already regretting his decision to let the man in after having turned him away so many times before. Now face to face, Burnt speaks grandly of the burden of being the acting head of the Lehman household. Valgans' annoyance spikes. He came all this way just to spout nonsense instead of answering his questions. Burnt playfully suggests they engage in a subtle war of information, but Valgans cuts him off. He states he has no time for such games and demands Burnt state his terms and leave. Their tense exchange is interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A small voice asks, "Excuse me, father. May I come in for a moment?" The door creaks open to reveal Louise, accompanied by her governess. Valgan stares, surprised by his daughter's sudden appearance while he has a guest. Louise nervously explains that she wanted to greet the visitor. Valgans considers her request, internally weighing the hassle of introducing her to Burnt against his daughter's wishes. Before he can decide, Peter Burnt beams with delight. He asks if Valgans' daughter wishes to greet him, and with a wide smile, declares, of course she can. Louise performs a graceful curtsy, her dress rustling. With her eyes closed in concentration, she formally introduces herself. "It is a pleasure to meet you. I am Louise Saboteur, daughter of Wolfgang Sonner." Her perfect etiquette catches her father completely off guard. Valgans covers his mouth, his composure shattered by a wave of paternal pride. He marvels at how well she performed the curtsy, noting that she's much better than Pebble. Beside him, Christoph smiles, murmuring his master's name with quiet approval. Before he can recover, Peter Burnt steps forward, bowing slightly to the young girl. He thanks her for the greeting and introduces himself as Peter Burnt, a marquis. He then adds a startling claim. He is a childhood friend of her father. Valgans looks on, his expression hardening with suspicion. Louise's eyes widen with excitement at this revelation. She turns to her father and asks if this means he knew Burnt from his time at the academy. Valgans, still processing the man's audacity, can only manage a strain that's right. He beams, flashing a peace sign with a theatrical flourish. With a sparkling smile, he declares that he is not just any friend, but her father's one and only best friend. The declaration leaves Valgans seething. He internally fumes, wondering since when he and Pebble had ever become best friends. Meanwhile, Louise looks up at Burnt, completely captivated. Seeing her rapt attention, Burnt extends an invitation. He suggests they have tea together, offering to tell the little lady stories about her father and mother from their academy days. Louise's face lights up, and she clenches her fists in delight, exclaiming that she wants to hear everything. And so, the conversation began. Burnt spoke at length about his and Katie's time at the academy, continuing until evening fell. He did so because Louise listened with such unwavering focus. He smiles to himself, realizing that she is truly hearing him out. He finally decides it's getting late and that he should take his leave for the day. As he begins to stand, Louise looks up at him, a hesitant expression on her face as she starts to speak. She asks if he would be willing to tell her more stories about her father and mother again sometime. Burnt's smile widens, and he places a hand over his heart, replying warmly, "Of course." She beams with pure delight, thanking Lord Burnt profusely as he takes his leave. The maid standing by smiles warmly at the pleasant exchange. Later, inside the manor, Peter Burnt visits Valgans, who is resting in bed. Burnt remarks with a closed-eye smile that he was surprised by the encounter with Valgan's daughter. Valgans, looking perplexed, questions how Burnt could remember him and Christoph so vividly from their academy days, especially recalling so many shared memories. His confusion deepens as Burnt continues, smiling knowingly. He posits a curious scenario. Even if he were present in Valgan's memories of the academy, Valgans wouldn't recognize his face. Leaning closer, Burnt's expression turns sharp. He states plainly that while Valgans remembers his name, he does not remember his face. He then addresses him directly as acting Duke Lehman, asking if his assessment is incorrect. Peter Burnt addresses Wolfgang, calling him by his title, Lehman, acting Duke. He states that Wolfgang seems to remember his name, but not his face, and asks if he is mistaken. Wolfgang simply affirms it with a knowing smile, thinking to himself that Bernd has always been a duke. Startled, Bernd sits up abruptly on the sofa, touching his head in confusion. He demands to know how Wolfgang realized it. Wolfgang explains that he has found Bernd's behavior odd ever since their time at the academy. He recalls that Bernd, despite having duties as a saint, would often skip school and deliberately avoid interacting with those around him. He continues, noting that even when people approached Bernd, he would never initiate conversation himself. Furthermore, Wolfgang recalls several occasions where Bernd would suddenly call him by name mid-conversation, followed by an abrupt shift in his attitude. A look of dawning comprehension crosses Bernd's face as he sweats. He asks if Wolfgang truly hadn't recognized him until he stated his own name. Wolfgang calmly sips from a teacup, admitting that he wasn't very skilled at hiding it back in his academy days. He then curses Bernd's excellent memory. His thoughts drift inward, revealing a long-held secret. He is unable to recognize people's faces. While he can discern their expressions, he cannot grasp the overall picture, causing his memories of them to become blurred and indistinct. He reflects that this condition was a major reason his parents did not grant him the dukedom, and why he was unable to use magic. He couldn't even remember the faces of his own family. He recalls that it was only later that the royal magic instructor of that time identified the cause as his demon eyes and managed to stop their effect. He explains that his demon eyes burn whatever he recognizes. As a result, he unconsciously avoids acknowledging people's faces. The power is potent enough to feel as if it could burn a person to nothing. Hearing this, Peter Bernd recalls the past. He remembers that Wolfgang changed after Cassandra began working for him. Though Wolfgang was already engaged to another, Cassandra was the one who actively sought him out, while Wolfgang himself seemed to avoid all contact. The memory culminates in a triumphant realization for Bernd. Eventually, Wolfgang began to call Cassandra by her name, something he had never done for anyone else at the academy before. This recollection brings tears to Bernd's eyes in the present. He covers his mouth, overwhelmed and a little frightened by the realization of just how intently Wolfgang must have been watching Cassandra. He responds to Bernd's emotional state with a gentle smile, quoting Cassandra's words to him, "Remember my face." Wolfgang muses that he still doesn't understand why he was able to recognize only her. He goes on to say that while he loves her as a friend, it was strange that she would ask such a thing of him. Bernd, utterly bewildered by the mention of friendship, can only stammer in confusion. Wolfgang, however, sees nothing strange about it. The statement hangs in the air between them. Wolfgang then adds that it was because of this that Bernd saved him. This catches Wolfgang himself by surprise, as he internally questions the memory. Pebble saved me? I did. The weight of the conversation leaves Bernd completely drained. Christoph sees him out, thanking him for visiting Louise. As he departs, Bernd recalls that his family's merchant business had acquired a transport company called Gesturheit, but at the time, he hadn't noticed any change in Wolfgang. His mind drifts back to that period, remembering that 2 temporary workers had been hired. He recalls one was a stubborn-looking boy with black hair and black eyes, accompanied by a man whose face he cannot picture. He laughed heartily, suddenly realizing he had forgotten the main topic of their discussion. Wolfgang chuckled in response, admitting it should have been mentioned from start. Waving goodbye, Peter Bernd promised they would meet again soon. As the heavy gates closed behind Bernd, Wolfgang watched him depart, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He mused to himself that the man was certainly interesting. He turned and walked back into the quiet manor. Bernd's words had stirred something within him, causing him to recall various memories of Katie. He found himself drawn into a long gallery lined with portraits. His gaze settled on one painting in particular, and a memory surfaced. Just as Bernd had said, he hadn't been able to recognize his own fiancée's face. But Katie had not despaired. Instead, she had taken his hand, promising they would get to know one another. And then, she had smiled at him. The memory faded, leaving him standing before the wall of portraits. He finally understood. The answer he had been seeking was in these paintings. He recalled the process. Because he couldn't see Cassandra's face, he had begun to paint her. Over and over, he committed her form to canvas. And, as he repeated the act, her face slowly became distinct and recognizable to him. His eyes found a finished portrait of Cassandra cradling their infant daughter. He remembered the happiness he felt when he first saw Louise in the classroom. He understood now. Katie had asked him to look after Ruru. With this newfound clarity, he sat on the edge of his bed. For now, he had to return to his work. The information Bernd had provided might be the very key to resolving the demonic beast incident. Meanwhile, Peter Bernd's own memories continued to surface. He recalled that around the time of the incident, a 2-person team had been temporarily hired. He remembered a strong-looking man with an unreadable face and a black-haired boy. A chilling thought struck him. The transport company had seemed suspicious. The stubborn man and the black-haired boy with him. Could that boy have been Carl, a capture target from the game? The image of a hooded figure armed with a crossbow flashed in his mind. He recalled the details from his past life's knowledge. The Otome game, Fortune Lover, featured 5 main capture targets. Among them was Carl, a character who was not of noble birth but an orphan from the slums, belonging to an assassin's guild. A man with a dark and complex history. Wolfgang considered the boy Peter had described. In a country where colorful hair was common, black hair and black eyes were a rarity. The age also aligned perfectly. Carl was 5 years old in the game, which would make him 11 now. He continued to ponder the connections. The Fichtner Information Guild in the capital was known to be the public face of the Assassins Guild. While few were aware of the truth, they would undertake any illicit job for the right price. Given the scale of the recent incident, it was highly possible Carl's guild was involved, though one was supposed to be 15 to officially join. His thoughts settled on a single conclusion. If Carl was indeed connected to all this, it wouldn't be strange at all. He then called out to his daughter. In response, Louise looked up with wide, determined eyes. "Yes, father," she exclaimed, declaring that she would absolutely not leave his side until he returned home for the day. He smiled gently at her earnestness. "Something surprising might happen, Rue," he cautioned, "but you mustn't make a scene." She nodded in firm agreement. "Yes, father." With that settled, Wolfgang set his plan in motion. He decided to visit the orphanage in the capital, the very place where he might be able to meet the Carl from the game. To facilitate the visit, he had already sent word ahead, using the pretext of wanting to make a donation. Since contributions to temples and orphanages were considered virtuous acts, his request should not raise any suspicion. He glanced at Louise, thinking that even if he couldn't recall a face, his memories of the game characters were distinct. He believed that Louise, with her child's perception, would likely be able to recognize Carl on sight. Beside him, Louise's heart pounded with nervous anticipation. Wolfgang recalled Carl's defining trait. Ordinarily a pleasant and kind young man, but in battle, he became a ruthless assassin who would use any means to win. It was this dramatic contrast that had created such a fervent following for his character. If possible, Wolfgang wanted to find him before he became an irredeemable criminal and offer him protection. As his carriage rattled through the streets, Wolfgang settled into his thoughts, a determined expression on his face. He hoped that Carl, once found, could be persuaded to use his power to protect Louise. He acknowledged to himself that this was a convenient, perhaps overly optimistic, hope, but his resolve was firm. He was now prepared to completely rewrite the game's original scenario. For Louise's sake, he would stop at nothing. In the Heine district of the royal capital, Wolfgang Valgans Saunter surveyed the run-down streets. He noted that the area was rife with crime, a dangerous place to bring a small child. He felt a pang of concern for his daughter, Louise, knowing there were no other suitable facilities to turn to. She, however, was filled with determination, pleading with her father to take her with him. Valgans found himself unable to refuse such an earnest request. Just then, their attendant, Christoph, announced their arrival, and a smile touched Valgans's lips. They had reached the Gwald Orphanage, an institution affiliated with the mountain god. A woman with prominent horns and long braids greeted them warmly, welcoming the Sana family. Valgans observed her with interest, remarking to himself that a dragonkin was a rare sight in this country. He turned to Christoph to confirm that the donations, including food and wool, had been properly received. The dragonkin woman thanked them profusely, apologizing for being short-staffed. As Valgans graciously dismissed her concerns, Louise stepped forward, her heart pounding as she clutched a book to her chest. She shyly explained that she, too, had brought something. She elaborated that she wanted to study, as there were still many words she couldn't read. The woman's expression softened into a kind smile. She thanked Louise for the gift and offered to read the book to her. Louise then presented a large basket overflowing with sweets she had made with the maids the day before, offering them to everyone. Valgans had consulted with the children of his subordinates to choose the perfect gift. The matron was overjoyed. Valgans acknowledged that a direct meeting like this might be a shock for his mother, but he felt it was all right. The matron mentioned she had heard about the situation at the mansion and that Louise herself had requested to become a foster daughter. Louise affirmed this with a resolute yes. Seeing her determination, the woman smiled, said she understood, and then led them inside. She guided them through a crumbling hallway where several children, mostly beastkin, were gathered. Valgans's expression hardened as he took in their surroundings. He observed that while the children were provided with the bare minimum of food and shelter, the environment was poor and the building itself was dilapidated. The matron called for the children to gather, announcing the donation from Countess Louise Saunter. At Valgans's prompting, the children chorused their thanks. Louise then stepped forward with her basket, announcing she had brought snacks for everyone, causing murmurs of excitement to ripple through the young crowd. Her words ignited a frenzy. "Wait, I'm first," one boy shouted, and instantly the entire group of children surged forward toward Louise and the sweets. The sudden, chaotic rush caught everyone off guard, and a look of alarm flashed across Valgans's face as he realized the situation was quickly getting out of hand. As the children swarmed forward, Louise held up the basket of sweets, her voice clear and calm. She assured them there was no need to panic, as she had made plenty for everyone. The orphans froze, their eager rush halting in stunned silence. The orphanage matron quickly took control, instructing the children to form a proper line. Watching the scene unfold with relief, Valgans remarked to Louise that he was glad she wasn't frightened. Louise explained that she wasn't surprised by their excitement, as even noble children react the same way to sweets. She correctly surmised that these children had likely never eaten such delicacies before. He watched her, a faint smile on his lips, realizing that his little Ruru was not so little anymore. His thoughts were interrupted by a more pressing matter. He still needed to find a boy named Carl. Elsewhere in the courtyard, The children were already happily devouring the treats. He turned to the matron, asking if a child like that was here, but she seemed uncertain. Valgans commented on the lively expressions he now saw on the children's faces. The matron explained that many of them came from difficult pasts, which often led them to become withdrawn. Valgans then asked if there was anything else they were struggling with, but she simply expressed her gratitude for his help. He resolved to do what he could, even if it was only a little, knowing full well that the residents of the poor district might react with hostility. His train of thought was broken by Louise's excited voice calling for her father. She ran up to him, presenting a boy in a hooded cloak and exclaiming that he had something amazing to show him. He took the object from Louise. In his palm rested a perfectly formed, minuscule rose, no bigger than a bean. He stared in disbelief, wondering what this bean-like thing was. It couldn't be a rose. He'd never seen one so tiny. The hooded boy spoke up, explaining that he had made it for the young lady as a token of thanks for the sweets. He clarified that it had originally been an ordinary rose. Valgans's gaze shifted to the orphanage's courtyard, where a large, vibrant rose bush stood. The pieces clicked into place. The boy must have intended to make a pressed flower of that size, but failed, inadvertently creating the miniature marvel instead. The matron leaned in and quietly explained to Valgans that the boy couldn't use general magic. Instead, he possessed a unique magic that allowed him to shrink things. Stunned by this revelation, Valgans turned his full attention to the boy and asked for his name. The boy pulled back his hood, revealing a young, earnest face with short, dark, spiky hair. He stated his name was Carl, and that he had no family name. Valgans's eyes widened in shock and recognition. The boy stood with a bead of sweat on his temple, looking utterly perplexed. But within Valgans's mind, the connection was undeniable. The dark hair, the dark eyes, they matched the features of the young fan from that day. There was no mistake. This child was the assassin. He struggled to reconcile this with his knowledge of the game. He had never heard of Carl possessing such a unique magical ability. As he contemplated this revelation, a plan began to form. He called out to the boy, "All right, Carl," to which the child eagerly replied, "Yes." With a sudden, confident grin, he formally introduced himself. "I am Wolfgang Saboteur," he declared, his voice full of purpose. He then announced his grand, unexpected plan to both Carl and a wide-eyed Louise. "We're going to get this whole group involved and start a business." Valgans addresses the young boy, Carl, and the matron, explaining his presence. He reveals that he was personally seeking a method to shrink objects to fulfill a specific wish. He demonstrates the result of his search, a minuscule rose resting in his palm, explaining that Carl's magic is the key to this phenomenon. Valgans notes that for this power alone, the Saboteur family would be willing to take him in. The other orphans murmur in surprise, one of them asking aloud if Carl is about to become a member of the Count's family. Carl himself remains silent, his expression unreadable. He looks up at Valgans, hesitantly beginning to speak, but Valgans cuts him off with a simple, firm confirmation. Valgans elaborates, stating that he anticipated this reaction. He had deduced that Carl's involvement with the Assassin's Guild was a desperate attempt to provide for the orphanage and protect those he cared for. His words paint a grim picture of reality. For an orphan in the slums, the only path to significant wealth is through high-risk, illicit activities like assassination. He reveals that the Earl had been paying Carl's associates, trapping them in a cycle of dependency. He concludes his reasoning, considering Carl's predicament. If the boy is tormented by the thought of abandoning his friends, then there is only one logical path forward. With that, Valgans presents his proposal. Carl can use his unique power to start a business, creating employment for all the children. The orphanage matron immediately steps forward, offering to provide the necessary capital for the venture. The boy stares, bewildered by the offer. He repeats the idea back to them, questioning if his magic could truly create a place where everyone could work. Valgans confirms with a confident smile. He adds that in the future, he will want to purchase more than just the products of Carl's magic, hinting at a broader partnership. He explains his plan to survey the unique skills and magic of the people in the orphanage and the surrounding slums, hoping to connect them to new business ventures. Carl, taken aback but resolute, quickly agrees. The idea immediately sparks excitement among the orphans. One boy proudly declares he's a fast runner, while a young girl clutching a doll shyly offers that she could do a bit of sewing. The enthusiasm spreads through the group. Another child boasts about his singing ability, while others ponder their own talents. The matron watches over them, a warm, hopeful expression on her face. He turns to the matron, his tone growing more serious. He explains that while he is not opposed to her seeking donations from a shrine, he believes it would be far better for the children to find a path towards self-sufficiency. To that end, he formally requests her assistance. He asks to borrow her extensive knowledge of the local area and for her to act as an intermediary with the nobles who manage the Hinrich district, stating his intention to start a business there for all of them. The matron closes her eyes, absorbing the weight of his proposal. After a brief pause, she opens them with renewed determination and agrees, formally addressing him as Count Saboteur. She then elaborates on her commitment, stating that since he has clearly considered the matter so deeply, she and the other shrine priests will offer their utmost cooperation. She vows to persuade any elders who might resist such a new venture. With their agreement solidified, Valgans thanks the shrine priestess. Standing outside with Carl and the children, He prepares to announce the next step in his plan. His attention then shifts directly to Carl, whom he informs that he would like to borrow him for a while at his estate. The young man is stunned into disbelief by the request. Before Carl can fully process the shock, Valgans leans in with a confident smile. With Louise now peeking out from behind the young man's legs, Valgans clarifies his intent. He wants to commission a job, declaring that he will be Carl's very first client. He assures the boy that, of course, he will be properly compensated. Still struggling to process the offer, Carl stammers, asking if this is truly happening. Valgans had already explained the terms to the orphanage matron, stating it was only natural to pay for Carl's skills and that a formal contract would be verified by the shrine. The matron had readily agreed, accepting the arrangement under the authority of the Godwall. With the formalities settled, he turns back to Carl and asks him to come with him. Overwhelmed, the boy immediately accepts the invitation, his fist clenching with determination. His acceptance sends a ripple of excitement through the other orphans. They crowd around him, wishing him luck on his new job with the Earl and asking for sweets as a souvenir. The matron smiles, telling him to do his best. Amid the cheerful noise, Louise looks up at her father, her eyes wide with excitement, and asks if Carl is really coming to their house. Valgans confirms that he is. He then lifts his daughter into a warm embrace, praising her enthusiastically for doing such a wonderful job finding Carl. She beams, telling him that with Carl's help, his wish will finally come true. Valgans agrees, crediting the success entirely to her, which makes her gasp in delighted surprise. His smile becomes slightly strained, however, as he privately considers the consequences of his actions. He realizes that since he made this decision without any consultation, Christoph will surely scold him later. Pushing the thought aside, he turns to the group and announces it is time to leave. A nervous Carl steps forward, trying to get his attention by formally addressing him as Lord Earl. He anticipates the boy's concerns, reassuring him that while he appreciates the consideration, there is no need to worry. He promises Carl that he will not be scolded and will have no regrets. The sincere words overwhelm the young man, bringing tears of gratitude to his eyes. He was brought to the Lehman ducal estate that day. While some might have considered him a pseudo-servant, his new master was prepared to do anything within his power for him. At the entrance, Christoph and the household maids looked on as their lord's new ward arrived. Upon his arrival, the staff immediately set to work, giving him a thorough and somewhat overwhelming bath. The maids were shocked by the state of his clothes and the sheer amount of dirt that came off him. Meanwhile, Louise excitedly burst into her father's study. She called out to him, urging him to come and see how wonderful Carl looked now that he was all cleaned up. He looked up from his work, acknowledging her as she and a freshly groomed Carl stood before his desk. Looking the boy over, Valgans remarked that he looked much more refreshed, noting that it was fortunate Marcus had left some smaller clothes behind. A flustered Carl asked if he looked strange, but Louise quickly chimed in with a bright smile, declaring that he looked very handsome. Her father smiled warmly, agreeing that the clothes suited him well. Overwhelmed by the praise, Carl could only manage a quiet, blushing word of thanks. His expression then turned serious as he addressed Carl directly, stating that there was something he needed to ask. The sudden shift in tone caught both Carl and Louise by surprise. Sensing the shift to a more serious topic, Louise decided to excuse herself. With a cheerful farewell, she announced she was returning to her room, leaving her father to watch her depart with a thoughtful expression. Now alone with Valgans, Carl stood nervously before the desk. Valgans reflected internally on the constant surprises of the day, noting how both Louise and Christoph had been watching the situation with a mixture of casualness and concern. Finally, Carl broke the silence, asking what his new master wished to discuss. In response, Valgans leaned forward, a regretful expression on his face as he began to explain. He confessed that bringing Carl to the estate was not merely about a job. It was to protect him, as he suspected Carl had some involvement in the area lock incident. He began his inquiry, asking Carl directly if he had recently worked a job carrying items for an adult man. Carl confirmed it, and Valgans's expression sharpened, realizing he was on the right path. The boy explained that a man named Herman had offered him money to assist with the job using his magic. A memory surfaced for Carl. He was tasked with carrying cargo and keeping watch, using his magic to shrink the items. He recalled that Herman, who was initially kind, grew progressively more demanding over time. His face clouded with the recollection. He explained to Valgans that despite being forced to use a great deal of magic, he was never paid. This, he now understood, was why he had been so wary of Valgans's own offer of money. Valgans, seeing the boy's distress, softened his tone. He apologized for bringing up a painful memory and asked if Carl knew what the object was. If words were too difficult, he suggested, perhaps Carl could draw it. Taking a pencil, Carl began to sketch. He described the object as originally being the size of his palm, with a beautiful stone set in its center. With his magic, he had shrunk it down to the size of his pinky nail. The drawing was then presented to a group of officials. An older man with a prominent mustache and another stern-faced officer examined the sketch with grave intensity. The mustached man, a magic tool master from the International Research Organization, looked up. He declared with confidence that the drawing depicted a newly developed communication magic tool. He elaborated further, explaining that the device in the drawing was one of a pair. It could project an image that its counterpart could receive, functioning as a one-way visual communication system. Valgans absorbed the information, his expression grim. He hadn't realized modern magic tools were so advanced. The implication was chilling. If this tiny transmitter had been secretly sold to those behind the area lock, he watched as the magic tool master, sweating profusely, declared that Carl was an imposter. A murmur went through the room as the expert quickly added that, despite the deception, the small size of the device itself was not unusual. The official standing beside Valgans then spoke, noting that the act of shrinking an object with magic was so uncommon it had been a blind spot. He theorized that with a receiver, one could secretly observe the decryption method. The accusation left Carl stammering, questioning if they meant him. Seeing the young man's distress, the official softened his approach. He gently placed a hand on Carl's head, reassuring him that it was all right, and asking if he had simply been forced to do something without knowing its true purpose. He continued in a calm voice, informing Carl that he would be asked many questions, but that he only needed to answer them honestly. Looking up with a mixture of surprise and relief, Carl readily agreed. The merchants involved in the incident had all used the same phrasing, claiming their goods were handled by the Jirhite Transport Company. Every package sent through them was secured with a device known as an area lock. Valgans reviewed the details, his brow furrowed in thought. The area lock itself wasn't the issue. That much was obvious. The problem, he mused, was that the method to disarm it had been leaked through skimming, a concept familiar from his past life. His understanding of the device was clear. An area lock could only be disarmed by a specific person or by reciting a phrase set by the sender. However, a particular setting existed that was being targeted, one that allowed any red-haired person to disarm it. This was the vulnerability that had been exploited. Meanwhile, the magic tool master recounted his experience, his expression troubled. He confessed that, in hindsight, something felt strange about that stubborn man, Herman. Despite the circumstances, he had felt the man was a good guy. He continued explaining to another official that Herman had told him something very good will happen to you, and instructed him to pass the message to his customers. Without suspicion, he had complied. He added that, according to merchant testimony, Herman appeared to be using a charmed magic tool. With this testimony, tracking Herman became a simple matter. A unit of the First Night Order moved swiftly, kicking down the door to his suspected location. "Open up. First Night Order," one of them bellowed. But by the time they broke in, it was too late. Herman, who had been hiding in the castle town, lay dead on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Back in his study, Valgans felt a rising frustration, wondering if he was being led on a wild goose chase, when a sharp knock sounded at his door. Peeking through the now open doorway was Louise, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Did you call for me?" she asked. Still seated, Valgans replied, "Ah, Ruru, I'll be right there, so just wait a moment." She questioned his words, wondering what he meant by right there. Deciding to enter, she announced, "Excuse me," as she pushed the door fully open. Inside, however, it was not her father who greeted her, but Christoph, who stood beside a flustered young man holding a small box. "Master, my lord," Christoph announced. The young man bowed his head slightly, declaring, "I've kept you waiting." He presents a small box, explaining to Valgans and Louise that after several failures, he finally succeeded. Valgans, with a gentle smile, encourages his daughter, whom he calls Ruru, to open it. Louise looks up, surprised, asking if the gift is truly for her. As she lifts the lid, a faint light gleams from within, revealing an ornate, circular pendant resting inside. Louise gasps at its beauty, exclaiming how lovely the pendant is. The young man points to a small clasp on its side, demonstrating that it can be opened. With a soft click, the locket opens to reveal a tiny, detailed portrait of her family. She sees her father, her mother, and a younger version of herself. Her eyes widen in astonishment as she recognizes them all. She realizes with a jolt that the painting was commissioned 2 years prior, when she was only 4. A wistful thought crosses her mind. How wonderful it would be to have a new portrait taken with both her mother and father now. Watching her reaction, Valgans smiles warmly. He explains that he and Christoph had been thinking the same thing, that it was a shame they didn't have a portrait of her at 6 years old. He continues, revealing that he had Carl miniaturize the painting so it could be placed in the pendant, allowing her to always be with them. Overcome with emotion, Louise's eyes well up with tears as she thanks her father profusely. Her gaze then shifts to the young man, her face beaming with pure gratitude. "Thank you, Carl," she exclaims. The boy, Carl, freezes, his expression one of complete shock. Clutching the locket tightly, Louise vows to treasure it forever. Carl, flustered, stammers that he merely performed the miniaturization. He turns his head away, a blush creeping up his neck. He thinks to himself, quietly pleased, that he is happy his magic could be of use. Still flustered but pleased, he watches as Louise turns to her father, the locket held tight. She eagerly asks Valgans if she can show her new treasure to everyone, gesturing towards the smiling maids. With a warm, gentle expression, Valgans gives his permission, telling her to go and boast about it as much as she likes. Her face alight with pure joy, she beams and declares, "Yes, I'm off, Otisama," before turning to leave. The moment she is gone, Valgans's composure breaks. He clenches his fist in sheer delight, exclaiming that he has just received the most precious smile imaginable. His sudden, emotional outburst leaves both Carl and Christoph wide-eyed with shock. He quickly regains his composure with a slight cough, turning his attention back to the young man. He addresses Carl, thanking him again for his hard work and inquiring about how his studies are progressing. Carl, looking somewhat hesitant, replies that it was a bit of struggle. He explains that it was apparently the first time his instructor had ever taught someone with a mixed attribute. Christoph elaborates on the difficulty of the task. The magic Carl used for the pendant was borrowed, and miniaturizing a complex object requires extremely stable magic. He notes that even Hermann's magic tools often failed during miniaturization attempts. To achieve the necessary stability, Carl had to seek out a magic instructor and dedicate himself to his studies. The instructor concluded that Carl was only able to perform the miniaturization magic because he possesses a rare mixed attribute of water and earth. Val Gans listens thoughtfully, remarking that it can't be helped. He reassures Carl, explaining that while a single attribute is common, a mixed one is rare, making it an unusual case for any teacher. He holds up the locket, stating that it was only because Carl was the first to attempt and succeed with this method that the gift was possible at all, and that there is no need for him to apologize. He offers his sincere thanks once more. When Val Gans asks if Carl is happy too, the young man blushes deeply, affirming with a wide smile that he is glad the young lady was so pleased. As Val Gans watches, he notes Carl's genuine smile. His gaze shifts, a subtle, knowing smile on his lips. This, he thinks to himself, is a good trend. His plan for the former assassin, Carl, was multifaceted. Carl would be taught magic, he would be given assistance in the slums to prevent him from straying, and ultimately, he would be turned into a loyal ally. The first step involved Carl acting as a tutor for Louise, a task he undertook with surprising earnestness. Reporting to Val Gans, Carl was overcome with emotion. Val Gans acknowledged that solving the slums' problems was a monumental task, but as a start, he promised to find a proper teacher for Carl. With a word of thanks for the report, he dismissed the young man, telling him to go and play with Louise. As Carl departed, Christoph entered the office, remarking on what a good child Carl seemed to be. He noted that Carl was studying diligently, likely driven by a powerful desire to help the other children from the slums. Val Gans then inquired about the investigation in the slums. Christoph gave a sly wink, reporting that they had yet to find suitable personnel. He explained their criteria: people who were quick-witted, dexterous, and physically capable. The challenge, he added, was that those with special skills couldn't be offered high pay, so they were still adjusting their recruitment strategy. He continued his report, stating that the current expenses for the investigation and education were substantial. However, Christoph was confident that if they could successfully train and employ these individuals, the initial investment could be recouped within a few years. He assured Val Gans they would provide wages appropriate to the work. The financial burden caused Val Gans to clutch his head in frustration, though he felt relieved he had sold the expensive pot to generate funds. Just then, Marcus burst in, enthusiastically asking to be part of the project. He praised the idea of securing funding from the Lehman Ducal House, mentioning that he himself had been sponsored by them. Val Gans, however, turned away from his half-brother. He explained to Christoph that this was a venture he had decided upon himself, and that he refused to burden Marcus with any more responsibility than the succession he already faced. He clarified that he was undertaking this project as the acting head of the Sonner earldom, not the Lehman dukedom, because the scale was far too large for a mere earldom to handle alone. Marcus insisted, urging Val Gans to consult him if any trouble arose, reminding him that the Lehman family stood behind him. He then presented Carl with a document, explaining that the neighboring Heine barony had agreed to cooperate. As Marcus formally requested Carl's assistance, Val Gans watched Louise with the other girls, resolving to focus on being a proper father for now, realizing he couldn't let her only wear dresses made by Carl. Seeing the slight smile on Val Gans's face, Christoph remarked that for all his complaints, he seemed to be enjoying the situation. Val Gans paused, then conceded with a thoughtful expression. He admitted that he found it deeply fascinating to see how both Carl and the town would develop from this point forward. His smile widened as he fully admitted it to Christoph. His attendant simply sighed, remarking that it was far too late for him to back out now. He was in his study when Christoph approached, a letter in hand. Val Gans lightly chided his attendant, reminding him that he was no longer a young master. But Christoph simply presented the correspondence with a knowing look. Taking the envelope, his attention was immediately drawn to the intricate wax seal. He questioned what it was, and Christoph confirmed his unspoken suspicion. A bad feeling crept over him. He observed that the seal was different from the usual missives sent from the royal palace. This was not the crest of the royal family. Christoph quietly affirmed his observation. The letter's summons brought him before the throne. Now clad in his formal uniform, he stood before the king, who announced that the letter was a personal one from His Majesty himself. The unexpected directness of the summons left Val Gans wondering why he had been called. In the grand throne room, Wolfgang Santer kneels before the assembled court. With his head bowed and a hand over his heart, he formally announces his presence as the acting head of the Lehman Ducal House, summoned by His Majesty. He expresses his profound gratitude for being granted an audience with the king, whom he addresses as the son of the kingdom. From his ornate throne, the king smiles warmly, acknowledging the acting Duke Lehman and welcoming him. Despite the warm reception, Val Gans internally seethes with annoyance, wondering why he has been subjected to such a formal and public ceremony. His mind flashes back to a more chaotic scene, his daughter Louise and other young girls swarming him, demanding his attention. He recalls his desire to escape the reality of the recent monster attack at the Fischer estate and the ensuing complications. The king's voice pulls him back to the present. His Majesty begins to list Valgans's recent achievements, praising him for crafting a barrier stone for the area rock and for preventing the initial wave of damage during the attack. He continues his praise, noting that Valgans's words have brought comfort to the populace and that his joint development of the Kyohu pump has been widely beneficial. The king also commends his recent work with Baron Heine to improve the capital's residential district. Valgans listens with his head bowed in humility. For these meritorious services, the king declares his intention to bestow a peerage upon him. As Valgans looks up, startled, His Majesty adds that after the ducal succession is finalized, it would be fitting for him to be known as Marquis Saboteur. Panic grips him. He internally screams for them to wait, that he doesn't want a promotion. He realizes with horror that a higher rank makes him a more likely candidate for the crown princess's hand in marriage, a development that perfectly mirrors the game's original, dreaded scenario. He immediately speaks, his voice firm. "I am running away to avoid that very fate," he declares, looking directly at the king. The monarch raises an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden interruption and bold statement. Bowing his head once more, Valgans continues his plea. He states that while the offer is an immense honor, it is far too great for a person such as himself, formally beginning his attempt to refuse the king's boon. His refusal sends a ripple of disbelief through the assembled court. The nobles murmur amongst themselves, shocked that anyone would dare to turn down a direct boon from His Majesty. He keeps his head bowed, sweat beading on his brow as he internally justifies his desperate gambit. He reasons that his parents are using this as an excuse to push him away out of jealousy, and besides, he can't even remember the faces of these high-ranking nobles. For someone in his position, either path felt impossible. The king, however, remains perfectly composed. He addresses the acting Duke Lehman, asking if there is anything else he desires. Valgans, still looking at the floor, quietly confirms that he has no other wishes. A thought then occurs to the monarch. He declares that he has a solution. He will introduce Valgans to a magic teacher specializing in the rare contradictory attribute. From the side, Marcus Lehman speaks up, explaining that while working on reforms in the slums, he encountered a boy with this very attribute. He finds the boy's potential fascinating and wishes to help him develop his power. The king listens intently, stroking his mustache in thought. He acknowledges that finding a suitable teacher for a user of a single, common attribute is difficult enough, and that his own personnel are limited. Seizing the opportunity, Valgans confirms that this is all he asks for. He believes that finding a teacher for the boy will also contribute to the vital reforms in the slums. A broad smile spreads across the king's face. He laughs, pleased by the straightforwardness of the request, and agrees. He declares that the matter of Valgans' own peerage will be held in reserve. Valgans looks up, a wave of relief washing over him. Dismissed, he turns and walks away from the throne. The king's order echoes behind him. Find a teacher for the contradictory attribute user and report back. As the next subject is called, Valgans feels a chill, his only thought being to return to Louise as soon as possible. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out to him. It's Peter Burnt, who greets him with a cheerful wave. He playfully asks if Valgans was being sarcastic with the king, then quickly adds that he's only joking, much to Valgans' visible annoyance. He walked away from the throne, his mind replaying the audience. He had accepted the reward for Louise's sake, but a part of him questioned if there was some hidden reason he should have refused. As he mulled this over, Peter Burnt's voice cut through his thoughts, chiding him for his intrusive pride. From his throne, the king chuckled, telling Peter to let it be, admitting he found Valgans' predicament entertaining. Still bowed, Valgans internally berated himself, realizing he had been too quick to accept and should have played a more difficult hand. His self-recrimination was cut short by a sharp, young voice. It accused him of having too much leeway as a ducal proxy and underestimating his own capabilities. Startled, Valgans turned to find a small boy glaring up at him, calling him a liar. Marcus looked on, equally surprised by the child's sudden appearance. The boy introduced himself with a confident wink as His Highness, the second Prince Hinrich. His playful demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by a furious scowl as he demanded to know what Valgans thought he was doing. As Valgans reached out instinctively, the prince slapped his hand away with a sharp crack. "Be quiet," the boy commanded. He acknowledged Valgans' surprise, but declared he had no need for such pity. He accused Valgans of being an officious meddler. With his arms crossed defiantly, the boy proclaimed that while he might look like a cheeky brat, he was, in fact, a primary love interest from the game Fantasy of the Maiden's Love Song. The first prince, Bernhard Hinrich. The revelation left Marcus speechless. The name conjured a dark memory from the game's plot. The very same prince who, in the original story, would break his engagement to Louise and ultimately orchestrate her downfall. The text noted that while his words were foul, he should be forgiven. The realization washed over Valgans, leaving him looking utterly weary. So, the first prince was here. He could only sigh, feeling a pang of sympathy for the troubles His Majesty had to endure. Peter began to speak, but Valgans interrupted, directly addressing the young prince. He demanded to know what the boy was talking about, pointing out that since many nobles frequented this area, it wasn't strange for a person of good sense to be present. The prince's face contorted with rage. He shouted that a place near him was no place for a beastkin, then furiously questioned why he the first prince should have to be there at all. He stands his ground, shouting defiantly that as he is to be king, the entire castle is his domain, and he can walk wherever he pleases. The prince demands that Valgans move aside, but receives only a silent, impassive stare in return. Behind Valgans, Marcus Lehman watches the confrontation unfold with wide-eyed shock, turning to Peter Burnt in disbelief. In response, Peter Burnt steps forward, his expression shifting into a menacing grin as a dark aura seems to rise behind him. He calmly informs the prince that his highness will surely disappear one day, a statement that startles the young royal and horrifies Marcus. The prince flinches back, stammering as he asks if he is being threatened. With the same chilling smile, Burnt confirms that he is. Marcus grabs his friend's shoulder, protesting that he is going too far. Burnt, unconcerned, explains that without such a direct approach, the prince would not understand the danger he is courting. Enraged and intimidated, the prince bares his teeth and demands that someone scold the man before him. His two royal guards appear, ready to intervene. As the guards attempt to restrain him, the prince begins to struggle, shouting for them to let him go and insisting he wants to play more. The commotion draws the attention of the others. He continues to thrash and shout that he isn't finished yet, even as his guards successfully drag him away from the scene. With the prince gone, Burnt offers a formal farewell to Duke Lehman's acting representative. In the aftermath, Marcus sighs with exhaustion, remarking on how difficult the situation was for everyone, including Burnt's own attendants. Burnt agrees, explaining that while he had to act like a haughty prince for appearances, it was ultimately a good thing. His expression softens into one of pure delight as he muses aloud, "What a wonderful day it is to be called by a special name by Valgans." Marcus stares, aghast, realizing his friend's eccentricities are showing again and muttering that he's gone too far, wondering if he accidentally spoke his thoughts aloud. He leans in close to Valgans, a wide, insistent smile on his face. He whispers that, when they're in private, Valgans must absolutely call him Pevel. Seeing Valgans' bewildered expression, he presses on, asking if the idea is truly so disagreeable, or if he's simply not used to speaking. Valgans remains silent, a flicker of realization crossing his face. Burnt cheerfully explains that Pevel is a rather unusual nickname, a simple combination of his names, Peter and Burnt. In this country, it is a common custom for those who are close to use nicknames. Wolfgang Valgans is called Val by his wife, Cassandra, whom he calls Katie. Together, they affectionately call their daughter, Louise, Rue. The name Pevel, however, has a different origin. In his past life, Valgans had intended it as a derisive moniker. Returning to the present, Valgans, with a hint of exasperation, tells Burnt to call him whatever he pleases. Burnt's eyes light up with joy, eagerly accepting the responsibility of choosing a name for his dear friend. As they walk away down a corridor, Burnt strides ahead, theatrically calling out variations of Valgans' name. He then turns, questioning if Valgans ever truly thought of him as a friend and wondering how many times he must say it. He stops, his expression softening into a genuine smile as he states simply that he wants Valgans to remember him. Pausing at a doorway, he looks back over his shoulder with a confident grin. He declares that he has no intention of ever relinquishing the title of Valgans' #1 friend to anyone else. He continues his speech, telling Valgans that his self-esteem is far too low. He claims to be fully aware of the heavy burdens Valgans shoulders and declares his intention to claim the spot right beside him, as he feels it's a shame to let it go to waste. Despite the heartfelt declaration, Valgans' expression hardens into one of absolute distrust. In response, Burnt simply lets out a soft, knowing chuckle. He listened as Peter Burnt's voice filled the carriage, the man expressing his pleasure at their conversation as the vehicle rumbled along. As the carriage came to a halt, Burnt turned to take his leave. He formally addressed Valgans as the acting Duke Lehman and requested that his best wishes be passed along to the young lady of the house. Valgans watched him go, a deep unease settling in. He couldn't comprehend why Burnt spoke to him in such a peculiar manner, questioning if this behavior stretched all the way back to their time at the academy. He had to admit, being around the man, whom he called Bell, was deeply unsettling. Alone now, he mulled over the encounter. Burnt's grand way of speaking, his overly familiar tone, it was all unmistakable. He realized with certainty that even without seeing his face, he would recognize that voice as Pevel. A plan began to form in his mind. He would confirm his suspicions upon returning home. As his carriage pulled away from the estate, he decided on a course of action. He would consult the Noble Directory, a comprehensive illustrated guide containing the portraits and profiles of the kingdom's aristocracy. By cross-referencing the information within, he could perhaps sketch the man's face and confirm his identity. And so time passed. Louise turned 7 years old, and Marcus successfully graduated from Klegel Academy, officially becoming an adult. With this milestone, Valgans' duties as the acting duke were finally concluded. Despite this, Valgans found himself buried under a mountain of paperwork. He thought to himself that while his official duties were over, he still had to prepare for Marcus's debutante ball, where he would serve as the acting duke. The sheer volume of tasks left to do was overwhelming. His mind raced through the extensive checklist, selecting and seating guests, sending invitations, confirming security arrangements and decorations, choosing the menu and arranging for ingredients, and even overseeing the formal attire for both Marcus and Louise. He then considered the future beyond the party. Once it was over, he would become an earl, and he and Louise would have to leave the Lehman Duchy to prepare for their move to the Sonnet territory. He groaned inwardly as the realization hit him. On top of all these preparations, his usual work and matters concerning the slums continued to pile up relentlessly. His expression hardened with resolve. He acknowledged that these were tasks typically managed by the lady of the house, but since they fell to him, he would see them done. He tapped his pen against the desk, a quiet declaration of his intent. Just then, the door to his study creaked open. Louise peeked inside, calling out to her father. She asked permission to enter, then timidly inquired if he was busy. His weary expression vanished instantly, replaced by a radiant smile. He felt his fatigue melt away just at the sight of her. Brushing his hair back, he assured her that he was just about to take a break and warmly invited her to have some tea with him. She stood before his desk and tentatively asked if there was anything she could do to help, noting that the preparations were for her Uncle Marcus's celebration. Valgans looked at his daughter, a thoughtful expression on his face as he considered her earnest offer. He explains to Louise that the upcoming occasion, Marcus's debutante ball, is a special one. Any misstep would reflect poorly on the entire Lehman ducal house. Therefore, he has arranged for a manners tutor to ensure she can greet all the guests with perfect decorum. Louise looks up at him, her expression serious and determined. He then asks if this will be her first time attending such a grand evening party. He clarifies that since she will be present at the debutante ball, she will be expected to conduct herself as Louise Saboteur, the daughter of a count. Louise recalls a past social event. She remembers Countess Fischer looking radiant and remarking on how dazzling high society appears, while young Emma Fischer beside her admitted that she was actually struggling and asked for guidance. The memory fades as Valgans continues his lesson on etiquette. He explains that within high society, women have their own distinct social circles and rules. He specifically instructs Louise that she must be the one to approach and speak with Emma. He immediately corrects himself, clarifying the rigid social hierarchy. Emma Fischer, as the daughter of a marquis, holds a higher rank than Louise, the daughter of a count. Because of this difference in status, Louise must wait for Emma to initiate any conversation. This rule of etiquette gives Louise pause. She reflects on how Emma has always been kind and considerate, likely at the behest of Countess Fischer, and understands she must be careful. As she is lost in thought, Valgans gently calls her name. He misinterprets her silence, asking if she regrets becoming a count's daughter. He lists the potential perks, studying with a tutor, wearing beautiful dresses and jewels, and perhaps even marrying a prince one day. Surprised by his line of questioning, Louise simply replies, no. She then clarifies her position with heartfelt sincerity. While she admits that studying is enjoyable and that she would be happy to have pretty dresses and jewels, her greatest wish is simply to be the daughter of the Saboteur family. Her earnest declaration, delivered with a radiant smile, leaves Valgans utterly speechless. Her expression shifts to one of concern as she continues, stating plainly that she dislikes the prince. She recalls Emma mentioning that even she has heard the unpleasant rumors circulating about him. Hearing this, Valgans's tension visibly melts away into a gentle smile. He admits he was worried, explaining that for her sake, he had refused to continue as acting duke and even turned down a higher peerage, fearing it would be too confining for her. He then asks what it was she wanted to discuss. Louise looks up at him and asks if she can listen while he works. Her previous question about his work sent a jolt through Valgans. As he sipped his tea, his mind twisted her concern into a completely different inquiry. Was she asking for a new mother? The thought was so startling that his hand trembled, setting the cup down with a sharp clink. He turned to face her, clasping his hands together with a strained smile. Flustered, he asked why she would even think to ask such a thing. She looked back, confused by his reaction. Louise explained that since her father was so busy, and having heard from her tutors that the master and mistress of a house performed their duties together, she was simply concerned. Her reasoning continued, as she wondered aloud if, with the lady of the house gone, he would need to welcome a new one to help manage everything. She looked at him earnestly, asking what he planned to do. At last, understanding dawned on Valgans. A gentle smile replaced his worried expression as he patted the cushion beside him, calling her over. Ruru, come here. Beaming, she happily scrambled onto the sofa to join him. As she settled in beside him, he gently patted her head. I'm sorry for worrying you, Ruru, he said softly. He then began to explain the source of his heavy workload, reassuring her that while he was swamped now, things would calm down once Marcus Lehman took over the family's affairs at the academy. He then paused, adding that there was something else to discuss. His tone grew more serious as he told her that he wanted to prioritize her feelings above all else. The earnest declaration caught her by surprise, and she could only think, mine? He elaborated, acknowledging that as the head of a noble house, there were certain unavoidable decisions he might have to make, such as welcoming a successor wife. However, he stressed that he had no desire to do anything that would make her unhappy. Leaning closer, his gaze intent, he put the question to her directly. Ruru, what is it that you want? She looked up at her father, her expression earnest, and finally voiced her own question in return. Is a new mother necessary? Her question hung in the air as she fell silent, her gaze unwavering while she gathered her thoughts. She then clutched a locket that hung from her neck, its surface glinting. She began hesitantly, This might be selfish of me, but looking directly at Valgans, she laid out her thoughts with surprising clarity. She requested that he be the only father she has, at least until she turns 10. After that age, she explained, she would need to prepare to become an adult woman, and since he is a man, there are things he wouldn't understand. It was for that reason, she concluded, that she wanted him to consider a new mother for her once she reached 10 years of age. Valgans's expression grew somber as he listened, his thoughts turning to his late wife, Katie. As he did, Louise's small hands tightened their grip on the locket. She knew, with a maturity beyond her years, that putting her own feelings first was perhaps the most difficult thing to ask for in this country. For a noble lady, turning 10 marked the beginning of preparations for a full-scale social debut. It was a time for cultivating knowledge, polishing one's appearance, and building a healthy body to navigate the treacherous waters of high society. To have a perfect mother figure as a guide was paramount, a role Valgans knew would be difficult for him to fill alone. Overwhelmed, he pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. He was astounded that Ruru, so young, could be so perceptive. A wave of joy washed over him, realizing what a wise child she had become. He had never wanted her to feel she had to suppress her own desires for the sake of their house. He held her tightly, his eyes squeezed shut. "Father?" she murmured. He recognized this feeling as his own ego, a remnant of his past life that he couldn't seem to shake, even in this new world. He apologized softly. "I'm sorry, Ruru." "Don't cry, father." Looking up at him from the embrace, she reassured him, "I'm not pushing myself. Because father is here." She holds him tightly, her eyes closed in blissful contentment. In this moment of profound connection, she makes one final, heartfelt request, that until she turns 10, he will remain her father, and hers alone. At a lavish party, Marcus Lehman is formally presented to the assembled nobility. The hall buzzes with conversation as guests, including a smiling Emma Fischer and her mother, mingle and observe the proceedings. A maid tends to a table laden with food and drink, ensuring the celebration runs smoothly. Watching the successful debut, Valgans is overwhelmed with emotion. Tears of joy stream down his face as he clenches his fists in triumph, exclaiming that they have finally managed to get through Marcus's official presentation. Later, in the quiet of a room, he reflects on the whirlwind of the past half-month, admitting his memories are a blur from sheer exhaustion. He pours himself a glass of wine, remarking that he hadn't had a single drop during the party and that while wine is good, beer would be more fitting for such a moment of relief. He raises his glass, not for himself, but to toast another. Clinking it gently against the second glass, he speaks to a locket on the table bearing a portrait of his late wife. He congratulates Katie on her graduation from being the acting duchess, telling her she did a wonderful job. His thoughts drift to the king and Prince Hinrich. He recalls the moment the young prince appeared at the party, admitting that he nearly collapsed from shock. It wasn't the king's presence that would have been the issue, but the prince's. He considers the political structure. The Lehman house is one of the 5 great ducal houses alongside Berndt, Muller, Fischer, and Brown. It is customary for the new head of such a house to extend an invitation for their debut to the king himself. He had been so focused on the protocol of the king potentially attending as a proxy that the possibility of the prince coming instead had completely blindsided him. The memory alone makes his heart race, and he mutters that it's bad for his health. He recalls that after an incident a year ago, Prince Hinrich has become quite attached to Marcus. Though the prince now puts on a regal front to hide his bratty nature, Valgans knows the boy's true character. Pushing those worries aside, he gazes at Katie's portrait again. He tells her that Ruru's dance was perfect and that her new dress was incredibly cute, earning many compliments. A wave of sadness washes over him as he expresses his wish that Katie could have been there to see their daughter's growth. His reverie is broken by the memory of a recent conversation with Louise. She had asked him to think about finding a new mother for her once she turns 10. The thought makes him sigh heavily as he contemplates the prospect of a second wife and wonders what he should do. He stood in his study, his voice quiet as he addressed his brother-in-law. "Marcus, is this all right?" Across from him, Marcus held up a bottle, confirming that he had been drinking with his brother-in-law. Marcus smiled, congratulating Valgans on his successful debut and remarking on how well-received he was by the ladies. He teased that while he himself was handsome, Valgans was the one truly surrounded by women at the Berndt ducal house party. He continued his praise, formally congratulating him as the new Duke Lehman. Marcus pointed out that the noble ladies were undoubtedly targeting his new position before chiding him gently to stop addressing him so formally. Valgans seemed taken aback by the entire exchange. Marcus's tone then shifted, explaining that since Valgans had now inherited the title of Duke Lehman, it would be strange for him to continue living in the ducal residence. He was being moved out. From his seat, Valgans looked up, his expression serious. "Can't that be stopped?" he asked. The question hung in the air, leaving Marcus momentarily speechless. Flustered, Marcus questioned his reasoning. He argued that there shouldn't be any issue with his departure, reminding Valgans that Christoph, a loyal retainer of the Lehman ducal house, was still there to support him. A tense silence fell between them. Valgans remained quiet, his gaze lowered, while Marcus watched him, waiting for an answer. Suddenly, Valgans's composure shattered. With tears welling in his eyes, he looked up, his face a mask of desperation. "I'm lonely," he cried out. "Don't go." Marcus stared, completely taken aback as a blush spread across his face. He realized Valgans smelled of alcohol. Though it didn't show on his face, he was clearly drunk. In this country, one becomes an adult at 18, and it was entirely possible that the ever-earnest Marcus was drinking for the very first time. As Valgans continued to wail about his loneliness, Marcus could only look on in stunned silence. He pats Marcus's head, drunkenly remarking that he never knew Marcus was the type to become a weepy drunk. He warns him to be careful at future social gatherings, lest he make a scene. He then loudly apologizes, promising that when the time comes, he'll ask for anything, even if it's a loan for a business in the commoner's district. Marcus, overwhelmed, continues to cry. The emotional outburst brings a painful realization to Marcus. He thinks to himself that Christoph knew all along how Valgans would always remain silent about the things that truly mattered. Valgans, his expression suddenly sober and his glasses back on, quietly asks, "The things that mattered?" Marcus turns to face him, a look of surprise on Valgans's face as he explains that he never had any idea what was going on in his mind. He clarifies that he kept quiet only because he didn't want to cause Marcus any anxiety back when he was still small. The explanation flusters Marcus, who retorts that he's bigger than Valgans now. He insists it's not about height, but that Valgans is always like this. Valgans looks at him intently, observing that Marcus has a tendency to try and shoulder every burden by himself. His words trigger a memory from Marcus, himself as a small child, crying and asking where Valgans is going, begging to be taken along. Returning to the present, Valgans's expression softens. He apologizes for not communicating properly and asks if Marcus can finally understand his feelings. He looks at Marcus with a gentle smile, explaining that once a particular painting is delivered, everything will become clear. He intends to draw the faces of their family to remember them, reaffirming that Marcus is his one and only brother. Overwhelmed, Marcus can only look back, his eyes welling with tears. As Marcus emotionally stammers his brother's name, Valgans suggests he simply cancel his plans to move out. Marcus, however, interjects, reminding him that the date has already been set. Valgans counters that having him and Louise around is a bother to him. He then declares with conviction that it is absolutely not a nuisance. A single tear escapes and traces a path down Marcus's cheek. He grows flustered, arguing that he is always with Louise anyway. This only agitates Marcus, who shouts back that he wants to be with Valgans too. The loud exchange startles Louise, who looks up at the two men with wide, worried eyes. A tear still on his cheek, Marcus reflects on the situation. He realizes that no matter how much time passes, his adorable younger brother has always been susceptible to his pleading eyes. Ultimately, Marcus relents. Later that night, the Sonda mansion stands quiet under the dark sky as his agreement hangs in the air. The following morning, the sound of chirping birds fills the air. Louise stops suddenly in the hallway, her expression one of surprise as she spots something unusual. She sees her uncle, Marcus, slumped against the wall, the picture of dejection. She calls out to him, asking what is wrong and why he is not at breakfast. Moving closer with concern, she asks if he is all right, wondering aloud if he has a stomachache. Averting his gaze in shame, Marcus mutters that he wishes a hole would open up for him to crawl into, lamenting his hatred for alcohol. Puzzled, Louise repeats his word, a hole. After a quick look around, she confirms there isn't one, but then innocently offers a solution. He can hide in her closet instead. She learns from Marcus that, as a result of their recent conversation, her engagement has been postponed until her true name conferment ceremony. This important ritual, where she will receive her true name from the creation god Elevido, will be held in conjunction with a magical power assessment. It is a ceremony that everyone must undergo upon turning 10, which for her is still 3 years away. Until that time, Marcus will be required to travel for work in the Sonda territory once every 3 months. This new arrangement means that Louise will be unable to see her friend, Emma Fischer, for some time. At the Fischer estate, Emma waves enthusiastically from the entrance, calling out a cheerful welcome to Louise. She runs up to them, greeting them warmly and inviting Louise to come play with her in the garden. She then informs Valgans that her mother, Countess Fischer, is waiting to speak with him. He turns his attention to the Countess, who thanks him for visiting the Sonda territory. Valgans, however, senses there is a specific reason for this meeting, wondering what she truly wants to discuss. His suspicion is confirmed when the Countess invites him for tea, adding that that young lady is also present. Valgans looks on with a hint of surprise. At that moment, a young woman with long, light-toned hair adorned with flowers steps forward. With a gentle smile, she introduces herself as Lena Fischer, the daughter of Viscount Eugen Fischer. At a social gathering, Lena Fischer bows politely to Countess Fischer and Valgans. She expresses her gratitude for the flowers they sent to celebrate her coming of age. Valgans recognizes the young lady. He recalls that in the original game's story, a monster attack left her sister, Emma, with a broken heart and a lost leg, causing Lena to never appear in the narrative at all. He reflects on the tea party where he and the Fischer family cooperated. Because of their joint efforts, the future was altered, allowing Lena to safely reach adulthood. Though that was the extent of his knowledge, he had chosen to send her a bouquet of ranunculus flowers to celebrate her debutante ball, hoping to add a touch of splendor to her evening. Looking at her now, he is struck by her beautiful golden hair and amethyst eyes. He muses that her smile feels like a ray of hope, one that might even have the power to change his own future. The present conversation resumes as Countess Fischer remarks with a smile that Lena was so delighted with the flowers, she wore them as a hair accessory to the party. A flustered Lena quietly calls out to her mother. Valgan smiles warmly, saying he's glad she liked them and mentions that he chose them with Louise. Beside him, Louise holds her own bouquet and happily exclaims that the fluffy pink flowers are pretty. Lena offers her thanks once more. Valgans replies that using fresh flowers as a hair accessory is a wonderful idea and that they suit her very well. Later, as they sit together, Countess Fischer asks Valgans for a consultation regarding Lena. Valgans explains that he must attend a ball at the royal palace the next day, an event he had planned to decline. However, the host has personally requested he guide a guest from another country. Seizing the opportunity, the Countess asks if he would be willing to support Lena during the event. He internally despairs, realizing he is terrible at socializing. To make matters worse, he admits to himself that he doesn't even have a clear memory of Lena's face to recall for the following day. He listened as Countess Fischer explained her predicament. She had originally asked her younger brother to accompany Lena, but after an injury, he was unable to attend. She requested that Valgans simply stay by Lena's side, hoping his presence would be enough to ward off unwanted advances. The request stemmed from public perception. Onlookers already speculated about a passionate romance between Lena and Marcus. The gossip suggested that if Marcus were to steal her away from her arranged partner, it would cause a significant scandal. Lena herself looked on with a worried expression, apologizing for the suddenness of all. She confessed that she was not accustomed to evening parties and felt quite anxious about the event. Despite her anxiety, the matter was settled. Valgans formally accepted the request to look after both the Countess and Lena, much to their relief. Both women offered him their sincere thanks. His agreement, however, concealed a private strategy. He internally acknowledged his poor social skills, resolving to act as nothing more than a wallflower. His plan was simple: arrange a meeting time and merely chat with Countess Fischer until Lena returned. He suddenly burst out laughing, startling the Countess and her daughter. He declared that if his plan failed, he would simply have Peter Burnt provide support. With a booming voice, he told them to leave everything to him, just as Louise and Emma appeared, looking up at him in surprise. The group then relocated to a garden terrace. As the adults sat, Louise politely greeted Lena, wishing her a good day and settling into the more relaxed atmosphere. She proudly displayed a small flower crown she had made. Emma praised its beauty, but Louise demurred, insisting that Emma's was much better and admitting that her own first attempt had been quite clumsy. She then turned to her father, holding out the delicate crown. With a hopeful expression, she asked if he would accept her gift. Valgan smiled warmly, replying without hesitation, "Of course." He accepted the gift, placing the flower crown atop his head. His expression was one of pure, gentle happiness, which was mirrored by Louise's radiant, joyful smile. On a balcony overlooking the estate grounds, the Fischer women share a moment of light-hearted amusement. Lena Fischer covers her mouth as she laughs, while her mother, Countess Fischer, hides a smile behind her fan. Young Emma, wearing the flower crown from earlier, beams with pure delight. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere is thick with music and conversation. Valgan Saboteur, having arrived with his escort, tells Marcus not to be so stiff. As they move through the crowd, Valgans overhears snippets of gossip concerning himself, whispers about how the son account resolved a certain matter and that he had broken off an engagement. He lets the words wash over him, his expression growing weary. The constant chatter drains him. He finds socializing tedious and already wishes he could retreat to the quiet solitude of his study. His brooding is interrupted by a collective murmur from the guests. Lena Fischer has made her entrance, a radiant and confident smile on her face, confirming that her family has arrived at the venue. He watches her from across the room, noting how she has captured the attention of every man present. Though he admits he doesn't remember her face, he cannot deny her beauty. Marcus leans in to inform him that Lena graduated top of her class from the academy and was a 3-time winner of the Miss Academy contest. Valgans grimly concludes that for such a prominent young woman, a male escort is indeed a necessity. Deciding to find something to eat before his official duties begin, he scans the crowd. His gaze suddenly stops, fixing on a familiar, cheerful figure. He realizes with a start that it's Peter Burnt. At the same moment, Burnt spots him and breaks into a wide, enthusiastic grin, calling out his name and waving energetically. Burnt rushes over, utterly shocked. "Voltaire!" he exclaims. "You recognize my face?" Valgans allows himself a small, proud smile. He explains that he spent an entire year meticulously studying the peerage directory, memorizing every name and portrait, including Burnt's. He feels a deep sense of satisfaction. This pleasant surprise, he thinks, has already made the entire evening worthwhile. He could leave right now and be perfectly content. His contentment is shattered when an elegant woman approaches them. She chides Burnt for leaving his conversational partner unattended. Valgans is momentarily confused, having never seen this woman with Burnt before. She then turns to him, introducing herself with a graceful smile as Beatrice, Peter Burnt's older sister, and thanks him for looking after her brother. He listens as Peter Burnt cheerfully introduces himself, claiming to be well acquainted with his older brother. Burnt then casually reveals that Beatrice is his fiancée, adding that she is already spoken for. Stammering, he struggles to process the information. Burnt, however, simply beams expressing his delight at being considered a close friend. Observing the exchange from behind her fan, Beatrice smiles warmly, noting to herself how truly fond her brother seems to be of Valgans. As they walk, Byrne explains that he was studying abroad in Chindle during his student days, where he had a fateful encounter with his fiancée. He clarifies that they only just returned to the country, which is why Valgans had never met them before. Beatrice then turns to him, asking about his own partner, who she heard was 9 years his junior. The specific age difference strikes Valgans with sudden force. The idea of a student aged 15 to 18 having a fateful meeting with someone so young filling him with alarm. His troubling thoughts are cut short when Byrne cheerfully announces that Beatrice's partner is a dragonkin. The revelation brings a sudden understanding to Valgans' face. Byrne elaborates that she was a priestess at the Gwald Orphanage. He explains that dragonkin have lifespans 10 times that of humans and reach their youth at age 10, meaning their perception of age is completely different. As he speaks, Beatrice expresses her own happiness at seeing her brother so content. The conversation shifts, and Valgans asks Byrne about rumors of his own engagement, which Byrne denies having heard. This occurs against the backdrop of their country's law, which obligates all nobles to marry. He reflects on this societal pressure. Men are considered of marriageable age until they are 30. Since he and Byrne are the same age, that same expectation to secure a fiancée should apply to Byrne as well. With a quiet sense of finality, he closes his eyes. He understands what he must do, fully accepting the unavoidable duty that lies before him. He stood amidst the party's attendees when a frantic voice suddenly called out to him. It was Peter Byrne, looking deeply distressed as he hurried through the crowd. Peter, accompanied by Lord Fischer, quickly asked if Valgans had seen Lena. Valgans, however, was puzzled, pointing out that their scheduled meeting was still some time away. He then clarified that he had been with Lord Fischer since entering the venue and hadn't seen her anywhere nearby. The implication of Peter's panic began to dawn on him, his eyes widening in surprise. Peter's expression grew more strained as he explained the cause for his alarm. Lena had been with him just moments before, he recounted, but had vanished while he was briefly looking away. Amidst the bustling party, a visibly distressed Lord Fischer approaches Wolfgang Valgans, Saboteur, and Peter Byrne. With sweat beading on his brow, he explains that he only looked away for a moment, but in that short time, his daughter Lena vanished. Wolfgang stares back, the word echoing in his mind. Vanished. His wife, Countess Fischer, calls out to him, her own expression fraught with worry. She reports that she has already checked the restroom again, but Lena is nowhere to be found. Wolfgang, now wearing his glasses, requests a full account of the situation. The Countess recounts that while she was speaking with a friend, Lena had excused herself to go to the restroom alone. She continues, explaining that she grew concerned when Lena did not return promptly. When she went to check on her, her daughter was already gone. She brings a hand to her mouth, stifling her rising panic as her husband places a comforting hand on her shoulder. Her distress deepens as she insists that Lena is not the kind of child to disappear silently. With conviction, she states that something must have happened. It is the only explanation. Seeing her state, Wolfgang addresses Countess Fischer gently. He suggests that since she is unaccustomed to such evening events, it would be best if she had someone to accompany her through this ordeal. Her husband agrees, but his voice is laced with anxiety as he points out that the time for their promised appointment is fast approaching. He looks helplessly toward Wolfgang and Peter. Wolfgang takes command of the situation. He instructs Peter to handle matters on their end and turns to Beatrice, asking for her cooperation. Beatrice smiles, fanning herself, and readily agrees, calling him Big Brother. Wolfgang concludes that they must act swiftly before the situation escalates into a public commotion. Following his lead, Beatrice approaches the Fischers with a reassuring smile. She mentions having just greeted Lena and remembers her lovely face well, offering to have the royal guards conduct a discreet search for her. The Fischers look on, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. Wolfgang formally addresses them, entrusting the search for their daughter to Peter and Beatrice. Lord Fischer's face hardens with grim resolve. As the group disperses to begin the search, Countess Fischer stands alone, her hands clasped tightly. In her thoughts, she pleads with someone named Angelica to cooperate with the others to find Lena, vowing that she will handle matters on her end. Far down a grand, empty corridor, Lena is seen walking away, hand in hand with an unidentified figure. Wolfgang Valgans Saboteur turns to a nearby guard, his expression grim. He notes that it was fortunate Lena's parents remembered what she was wearing, as it would make the search easier. He instructs the guard to speak with the other royal guards and begin a discreet search immediately. Elsewhere in the Grand Hall, Beatrice suggests a plan to Peter Byrne. She points out that there are areas within the party that are difficult for men to enter, and that he should handle the search of the main hall. Having delegated tasks, Wolfgang decides to search the garden himself. He feels a sense of unease, thinking about the vast scale of the royal castle's night party and the sheer number of guests. He scans the area, wondering which exit leads to the gardens. Out in the moonlit garden, Lord and Countess Fischer discuss how their future has changed now that Lena is of age. Nearby, hidden among the rose bushes, a young couple shares a clandestine kiss, the woman pleading for them not to be seen. Unnoticed by all, Lena Fischer walks past them into the deeper shadows of the garden. Suddenly, Wolfgang bursts through the hedges, his sudden appearance startling the couple. The woman lets out a sharp cry of surprise as Wolfgang himself stops short, taken aback. He quickly raises a hand in apology. "My apologies," he says, averting his gaze. "Please, pay me no mind." The young man watches him go, muttering under his breath about who the strange man could be. Walking away, Wolfgang grits his teeth in frustration. He admonishes himself for his lack of tact in the royal garden, reminding himself that the royal guard is also searching and he needs to get a grip. He continues his tense patrol through the manicured paths, the decorative lights doing little to soothe his growing agitation. He freezes, his head snapping to the side. A faint sound reaches him. He wonders if it's a woman's voice, muffled as if her mouth is being covered. Is someone trying to remain hidden? In a stone alcove shrouded in shadow, the source of the sound is revealed. A man with spiky hair holds Lena Fischer tightly, his hand clamped over her mouth. He speaks in a low tone, suggesting that perhaps being seen wouldn't be so bad after all. He glares at the man, his mind racing with fury. He thinks to himself that if things go according to plan, the man will fall right into his hands. He silently curses the man, calling him a creepy idiot. His anger gives way to a swift analysis of the situation. He realizes it's the perfect time for an abduction. The patrolling knights are nowhere to be seen. He must find Lena. Meanwhile, Lena is gripped by terror. She understands that if this man is allowed to get away with this, her future debut could be ruined. The possibility is unbearable to her. He continues to weigh his options. The man is clearly targeting a woman, and with the knights gone, intervention is difficult. He considers using his magic eye, but remembers that its activation is strictly forbidden within the palace grounds. Letting out a frustrated sigh, he tries to calm himself. He tells himself not to get too worked up, acknowledging that he isn't particularly strong. His thoughts are interrupted by the abductor's voice remarking on how beautiful Lena is. Wolfgang's eyes widen as he sees the man holding the young woman. He recognizes her instantly. In a flash, he lunges forward, striking the man from behind with a powerful blow. He roars at the scoundrel to get lost. The attacker crumples, seemingly unconscious. As Lena slumps forward, Wolfgang calls out her name, asking if she is there. She lets out a soft whimper. Lena is on the ground, her hands bound, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth in shock and fear. Wolfgang looks down at her, his expression filled with concern. He quickly removes his jacket. Apologizing, he offers it to her, telling her to cover herself. He kneels before the shaken young woman, taking her hands in his. With a concerned expression, he asks if she's all right and uninjured. Lena, her eyes wide with shock and brimming with tears, can only stammer his name in response, her hands trembling. Her fragile composure shatters. With a wail of delayed terror and relief, Lena collapses against him, burying her face in his shoulder. He holds her steady, his expression softening as he murmurs her name. As he holds her, he speaks softly, acknowledging her fear and reassuring her that everything is all right now. He tells her they should return to her mother and father. Lena continues to weep, clinging to him for support as they prepare to leave the secluded garden path. On a dimly lit terrace, Lena Fischer recoils at a table as Val Gans stands nearby. Across from them, Marcus Lehman slumps over, groaning in distress. Val Gans moves to block her view of Marcus, telling her it's all right and that she shouldn't look. His thoughts, however, are far from calm. He acknowledges his desire to burn Marcus to a crisp, but realizes that using magic would not only be his own crime, but could also implicate Lena as an accomplice. His eyes narrow with cold fury, a dangerous glint appearing behind his glasses as he considers his next move. A different kind of resolution settles on his face. He decides that a bit of public shame will have to suffice for now. With that, he reaches for Marcus's trousers. He acts swiftly, pulling the man's trousers down around his ankles with a sharp tug. With a triumphant, almost manic grin, he holds up Marcus's undergarments. He thinks to himself that if he were to call the patrolling knights at this moment, the man's reputation would be utterly destroyed. The thought of this poor man brings him a grim satisfaction. His task complete, he turns his attention back to Lena. He gently suggests they move before they are seen, and asks if she is able to stand. She looks down, her hands clasped tightly. With an apology, she admits that she is not yet able to stand on her own. His expression softens with concern. He apologizes for his thoughtlessness and offers to carry her. Lena looks up, her eyes wide with surprise as her hands tremble slightly. Without waiting for a reply, he gently scoops her up into his arms. Lena lets out a small, startled gasp, her face flushing as he holds her securely. Held securely in Valgan's arms, she murmurs an apology for clinging to him. He calmly replies that it is for the best, as it prevents him from seeing her face. Flustered, she can only manage a quiet agreement, hiding her face against his chest. His attention is then drawn by an approaching guard, who addresses him as Lord Saboteur and reports that they have found Lady Lena. The guard and his companion listen as Lena explains from off-panel that she tried to stop the commotion, but the culprit bumped into her, causing her to fall and twist her ankle. She urges them to capture the man before he escapes to the back of the mansion. Val Gans takes command, ordering the guard to open a private resting room for Lady Fischer and to inform her parents immediately. As the guard moves to obey, Lena looks up at Val Gans, asking if he will help her. Her question is preempted by a panicked cry, as her mother, Countess Fischer, appears with a look of shock and calls out her name. She rushes to her daughter, who is now seated, lamenting her terrible state. Lena apologizes, and the Countess embraces her tightly, expressing profound relief that she is safe. With her daughter attended to, she turns her attention to Valgans, who has begun to depart. She asks him to wait, and he pauses at the doorway. He turns as Countess Fischer expresses her immense gratitude, noting that he has now come to the aid of both Emma and Lena. Valgans replies with a slight smile, stating he was simply glad to have found Lena quickly, as he would have felt terrible if she had been hurt. He listens as the Countess adds that when Lena saw his face as he rushed to help, she felt a true sense of relief. At this, Lena herself looks up, her cheeks faintly flushed. With a gentle smile, she offers her sincere thanks, calling Lord Saboteur her benefactor. He listened intently, a sense of relief washing over him as he registered the change. Miss Lena's voice was no longer trembling. Her mother, Countess Fischer, now fully composed, insisted on finding a way to repay him. Valgans, however, gently refused, stating that their gratitude was more than enough. Seizing the opportunity, Lena then proposed a different kind of thanks, an invitation for Louise to attend a tea party once she had fully recovered. The little girl's face lit up with excitement. Valgans leaned down and explained to her that Lena was very fond of her, prompting an amazed gasp from Louise, who declared it was wonderful. Her delight was mirrored by Lena, who smiled warmly. She confessed her own happiness, stating that having the adorable Louise at her tea party was not a reward for him, but a personal treat for herself. As night settled over the Fischer estate, she solidified her promise, vowing to extend the invitation without fail. Later, as he walked through a quiet corridor, Valgans reflected on the invitation. He believed that the opportunity to attend a tea party hosted by one of the 5 great ducal houses would be an invaluable learning experience for Louise. His thoughts were interrupted by a cheerful greeting. Peter Byrne appeared, praising Valgans for his impressive actions. Valgans was momentarily startled to see his acquaintance, whom he knew as Pevel, while Louise, still buzzing with excitement, happily nibbled on a tree. He explained that he had just seen Valgans escorting the messengers and the royal guards, remarking that he was more than just a handsome face. Behind them, the guards themselves looked utterly exhausted from the ordeal. Changing the subject, he noted that Valgans must be hungry after the commotion. He offered an invitation, having already prepared a room nearby for them to share a light meal. The kind offer seemed to trigger a wave of self-reproach in Valgans. He suddenly remembered that his duties with the royal guard were finished, meaning he should be heading home. The realization that he had forgotten something so basic made him feel utterly useless. He flinches, utterly flustered by Peter Byrne's persistent teasing. He internally laments how much time this is taking, blaming the other man for the delay. Nearby, Louise cheerfully says her goodbyes, eager to return home quickly to be with Rue. His friend, however, simply smiles with amusement, remarking that some things never change with him. As they stand together, Byrne continues, telling Valgans that while he has been patient, Valgans acting as a substitute for Rue is not cute in the slightest. Meanwhile, in another room, Countess Fischer expresses her concern for her daughter, Lena. She notes that Lena's father will be arriving soon and asks if she's all right, offering to fetch something warm to drink or even call for a doctor. The concern triggers a memory for Lena, a moment when she suddenly found herself unable to walk. In that instant, Valgans had swept her into his arms, carrying her to safety. Returning to the present, Lena reassures her mother. She admits she was startled by the episode, but is perfectly fine now, explaining that thanks to Lord Saboteur, nothing bad happened. Later, sitting alone by a window, Lena clutches what appears to be Valgans' jacket. A deep blush spreads across her face as she quietly thinks his name, her admiration clearly blossoming into affection. While taking a meal, Wolfgang Valgans Saboteur is reminded that in 1 month, he is scheduled for a regular business trip to the Sauna territory, where Marcus is currently staying. His quiet morning is interrupted by an urgent arrival. A young man with feline ears, identified as Hansel Divo, apologizes for intruding. He explains that he is one of Christoph's 2 beastskin disciples. Valgans, sensing the gravity of the situation, asks what has happened. Hans begins his explanation by recounting an event from 4 years prior. A very young Louise had found him collapsed on a cobblestone path, ragged and injured. Though his origins were unknown and he refused to speak of them, Louise insisted on taking him in. He continues, stating that thanks to Christoph's mentorship, he now serves as a butler for the Sauna household despite his youth. With the context established, he delivers the urgent news. A report has just arrived confirming that an unregistered dungeon has been discovered near East Tiela village. The revelation causes Valgans to jolt upright in his seat, his expression filled with shock. Hans elaborates that monsters had recently begun appearing near the village, prompting the locals to hire adventurers for a subjugation mission. It was during their investigation that the party discovered the dungeon's entrance. The situation, he reports, is worsening. The number of monsters emerging from the dungeon is increasing, and the village's protective barrier stone is being drained of its magic. Hans formally requests Valgans' aid. With a hardened gaze, Valgans immediately declares that he will head to the location at once. Surprised by the immediacy, Hans asks if he means right now. Valgans confirms and instructs Hans to accompany him, telling him to have a carriage prepared. Hans quickly acknowledges the order. As he moves to depart, Valgans turns to the startled maid, apologizing for his abruptness and asking her to clear away his unfinished meal. He pauses for a moment, a dark premonition washing over him. From his past life, he recalls that for players of the game, East Yella was a place tied to deeply unpleasant memories. Their journey takes them toward a range of distant, forested mountains. Arriving at the entrance to the East Tiela Cavern, they're met by the adventuring party, Gale's Shield. A blonde warrior named Griselda Osti steps forward to brief them. She explains that the dungeon seems to nullify the effects of magic tools, rendering them useless. She warns Valgans that within the cavern, they can only rely on what is within arm's reach, and advises him to be careful. He and his companions venture into the dungeon's gloom, led by the armored adventurer, Griselda Osti. She explains the perplexing nature of the place. No matter which route they take, they somehow find themselves back at the entrance. Furthermore, she adds, the monsters seem to be appearing from a lower level that they have yet to find. He listens intently, a faint, calculating smile on his lips. They have yet to find a passage to this supposed lower floor, and so they have been proceeding with caution, not exploring too deeply. As Griselda continues, mentioning the high number of monsters and that some even resort to cannibalism, Hans's feline ear suddenly twitches, catching a sound imperceptible to the others. In an instant, a shadowy monster with sharp claws lunges from the darkness directly at him. His eyes widen in shock as Hans cries out his name in warning. Before the creature can land its blow, Hans throws himself in front of Valgans, taking the vicious slash across his own back. Griselda shouts for them to protect Lord Saboteur. Later, in a makeshift camp, Valgans sits with a fresh bandage on his head. Hans explains that while he thought Valgans' evil eye was a powerful ability, it's useless in this dungeon. He points out that Valgans can't use the eye if he can't perceive the target, making him a liability. Valgans clenches his teeth in frustration, realizing that a sudden attack from the darkness renders his power useless. Griselda dismisses his concerns, telling him not to worry about the minor scratch. She states that they were already planning to return to the village for a consultation, so they will proceed deeper into the dungeon as intended. As Hans expresses concern over the dungeon being a poor match for his abilities, Valgans pieces together the clues, always returning to the entrance, the disorienting magic. A realization strikes him. He quietly concludes that it must be a loop trap. Inside the dungeon, Griselda expresses her confusion about being warped. Valgans, his expression serious, explains the situation. The darkness makes it difficult to see, and they have been subjected to a forced spatial transfer. Hearing his explanation, one of the other adventurers, a young demi-human, realizes with a gasp that if they intended to go deeper, they've instead been sent back to the entrance. Their realization is cut short as a reptilian monster materializes before them. Griselda is stunned, remarking that she didn't sense its presence at all until it was right in front of them. She insists that, even in darkness, a professional should be able to detect a creature's aura. The demi-human adventurer suggests a startling possibility, that the monsters are also warping in, which would explain their sudden appearance. The guard beside them agrees that it makes sense. Griselda considers this, her thoughts turning to Lord Saboteur. Later, Griselda asks Valgans if he anticipated this just from a preliminary survey. With a small bandage now on his cheek, he confirms that he had read a report on a dungeon with a similar gimmick and wanted to investigate it himself to be certain. His knowledge comes from a painful memory of his past life. He recalls playing a notoriously difficult video game, recognizing the dungeon's mechanics as identical to the East Tail Cave. He remembers the brutal combination of darkness and warp traps, and how the game forced players through it to get a necessary item on the lowest floor. The memory of the game over screen flashes in his mind. He recalls diving into that dungeon countless times, only to be completely wiped out, his resources never being enough. Shaking off the memory, he turns to the adventurers. He confirms that this is indeed the East Tail territory he knew of, a place he'd been wary of but hadn't located until now. He then asks them a critical question. Did they notice their footing just before they were warped? He elaborates, explaining that if one looks down carefully, the warp trap can be identified. Since the destination is fixed, it's possible to find a route to the deeper levels through repeated trials. A confident smile spreads across his face. He declares that since the maps differ between game versions, he won't use a guide. Instead, he will map it out himself with paper and pencil. Somewhere on this floor, he concludes, there must be a switch to access the next level. He reviewed the reports, a thoughtful frown on his face. The patterns described felt familiar, yet he sensed the underlying mechanism was not quite the same as he'd anticipated. Griselda, observing him, suggested that considering the warp traps and enemy patrols, their best course of action was to advance slowly, meticulously verifying and correcting their map as they went. Her tone grew more urgent as she warned him against reckless exploration. She explained that the situation had already escalated beyond what they could handle with sheer numbers. It was imperative, she stressed, that they find the monster's nest and destroy the source of the problem quickly. Otherwise, they would face dire consequences. As he processed her words, a chilling term from his past life surfaced in his mind. A monster out-of-control phenomenon. He recognized the signs immediately. The dungeon was on the very brink of this catastrophe. This phenomenon was characterized by monsters, normally confined to the deepest levels, suddenly surging outwards to the surface world like an unstoppable flood. He recalled that in the game, preventing such an outbreak was a critical objective to protect the entire nation. Back in a more secure location, Valgans reiterated the urgency of the situation, acknowledging the dungeon's immense danger. Hans, ever efficient, informed him that he had already taken the initiative, dispatching recruitment calls to both the Saboteur and Lehman nightly orders for reinforcements. He immediately formulated a new strategy for the upcoming joint operation. All dungeon exploration would cease for the time being. The new priority, he declared, was to subjugate the monsters that were already spilling out. He could not risk losing experienced adventurers like Griselda's party before the main force arrived. She nodded in agreement, a look of understanding on her face. She thanked Lord Saboteur for his consideration and clear command. The plan was set. The adventurers of Gale's Shield would stand guard at the dungeon's ominous entrance, working in shifts. Griselda affirmed that outside the dungeon's magical confines, she and her party would be a formidable fighting force. Later, Hans approached his master with a worried expression. He questioned if Valgans was truly well, reminding him that he had only recently expended a great deal of energy to replenish the magic of the village's barrier stone. He pointed out that his master's magical reserves could not have fully recovered yet. His concern went completely unheard. Valgans, with a blissful expression, was entirely absorbed in a letter. He excitedly told Hans that he had received a message from Louise, who, having some free time, had brought him a packed lunch. Hans could only stare in exasperation, demanding to know if his master was listening to him at all. He covered his face, completely overwhelmed by the charmingly simple drawing his daughter had sent. The pure, unpracticed art was almost too much for him to bear. His emotional moment passed, replaced by a steely resolve. He thought of how much he wanted to eat with her again, stealing his determination. He had to work hard and return home quickly. Beside him, Hans watched, addressing him as master. He tried to reassure his butler, stating confidently that he had a magic recovery potion if things got dire. Hans immediately interjected, urging him to wait. He warned that the potion was a potent medicine, and that continuous use would result in strong side effects. As night fell over the forest, Hans's voice carried a final piece of advice. The potion was to be used only as a last resort. 10 days passed. A military encampment stood ready near the dungeon. The forces of the Sauna house prepared for the operation. Inside one of the tents, Valgans lay resting, his eyes open, when a voice called out his title, startling him. He sat up instantly as Griselda appeared at the entrance. She apologized for disturbing his rest, but reported that there had been a change within the dungeon. Without hesitation, Valgans declared he was on his way. During that time, the Saboteur forces had joined with the Lehman Knights to resume the investigation. However, the number of monsters inside only continued to increase, eventually forcing the deployment of the elite troops. Returning to the present, Valgans asked for the current situation. Griselda reported that the elite unit investigating the second floor had discovered a nest and relayed the information via a communication device. The news was a breakthrough, and Valgans was audibly pleased. Her report detailed a chaotic scene from within the dungeon. During their battle, the monsters they were fighting suddenly broke off their attack and began swarming towards the exit all at once. She urgently reports to Valgans, her expression grim, warning that a significant number of monsters could pour out from the dungeon all at once. He stares, wide-eyed, absorbing the shocking possibility. Snapping into action, he turns and shouts for Hans. The cat-eared butler appears instantly, confirming his presence. Valgans issues a swift command. Wake everyone in the tents and gather all combat-ready personnel to face the oncoming threat. Hans asks what his master intends to do. With cold resolve, Valgans adjusts his glasses. He declares that if the monsters emerge from the dungeon, he will personally incinerate every last one of them. At the dungeon's mouth, the situation is dire. An adventurer shouts that their lookout position inside the cave has reached its limit. As the first monsters begin to spill out, Valgans, now clad in a formal military coat, raises a hand and roars for them to get out of the way. A torrent of pure flame erupts from his outstretched hand, engulfing the dungeon entrance and the surrounding forest in a massive conflagration, incinerating the emerging swarm. The other adventurers watch in stunned silence. A female mage marvels at the incredible power, questioning if he truly cast such a spell with a single word. Another warrior confirms it was a chantless incantation. Valgans, his back to them, apologizes for any monsters that slip past and requests a sweep of the area. From the camp, the devastation is clear. The forest before the dungeon is a scorched, smoldering ruin under a smoke-filled sky. Observing the scene, Hans smiles with admiration, remarking to the other stunned adventurers that his master is, in fact, completely overpowered. Back at the entrance, Valgans notes that the number of monsters has indeed decreased. Griselda emerges from the cave, however, reporting with distress that there were simply too many to stop them all from escaping to the outside. He reassures her, stating that since they discovered the nest, she did well. Her companions voice their awe at the sheer power of his flames. But Valgans's expression darkens as he looks into the smoldering aftermath, realizing with a start that some of the wolf-like monsters were not burned at all. He surveyed the results of his spell, remarking that it went as expected. Nearby, the demi-human adventurer marveled at the display, identifying it as the magic of a count. They noted with awe that even with such destructive power, the flames only consumed the monsters and nothing else, making it an easy victory. Their companions shared in the astonishment, their faces a mixture of shock and relief. Hans, however, observed with a calmer demeanor that the immediate threat seemed to have passed. As Griselda rallied the others to hunt down any stragglers, Hans turned his attention to his master. He voiced his concern, pointing out how pale Valgans looked. Valgans brushed it off, insisting he was fine and merely a bit fatigued. His confident words, however, belied his true state. He gasped for breath, the strain of the powerful magic evident on his face. He inwardly acknowledged that fighting in the open was far easier than in a dungeon, where darkness would have been an added complication. A sudden realization cut through his exhaustion. He turned to his attendant and asked, Hans, more importantly, I wonder if this method is usable. A heavily armed and cloaked expeditionary force marches with grim determination towards the dark, gaping entrance of a cave. The path is marked by large, crystalline stones, hinting at the magical nature of the area. The diverse group, composed of humans and demi-humans, moves as one unit, their shields held ready. Observing from a tall wooden watchtower, Wolfgang Valgans Sana notes that it is quite a spectacle. Beside him, his attendant, Hans Ildivo, agrees but voices his opposition, stating that the burden on his master is far too great. Wolfgang, however, dismisses the concern with a faint smile, reasoning that there was no better alternative. He mentally reviews the complex strategy. A keystone has been placed to seal the dungeon's exit, trapping the monsters inside. A separate unit will use explosive magic to flush the creatures from their nest on the second floor, driving them towards the main force. From his high perch, Wolfgang will expand his vision to eliminate any stragglers and clear the surrounding forest to ensure a clean engagement. The true nature of the plan comes into focus. It is an operation designed to intentionally orchestrate an accident to annihilate all targets within the dungeon. He acknowledges the inherent danger of the subjugation plan. He recalls that not only Hans, but many others had initially opposed it, though he ultimately managed to persuade them. The risks were undeniable. In the confines of the dark dungeon, even elite troops would be at a disadvantage. A prolonged battle could trigger a monster stampede, resulting in sacrifices and significant casualties. Despite this, he felt it necessary to push things to settle the matter here and now. He explains to Hans that as the lord of this domain, it is only natural that he be the one to put forth the effort. Hans listens intently, his expression thoughtful. Wolfgang's gaze softens as he reveals his ultimate motivation. He wants to create a safe, stable land for his daughter, Ruru. It is a place he intends for her to move to once she turns 10. A confident smile spreads across Hans's face. He declares that his master, the Lord of Saboteur, is truly the best. His attention snaps back to the operation as Griselda Osti reports from below. She confirms that the vanguard has reached the monster nest on the second floor. Wolfgang acknowledges her, stating that they can commence the operation at any time. He gives the final command, his voice ringing with authority. Begin. His eyes are wide with focus as the operation commences. In response, a low rumble begins to build from within the dark, gaping maw of the monster's nest. As the sound grows, Hans spots the first signs of movement. They're coming, he shouts, as reptilian beasts and snarling wolves surge from the darkness. Below, a line of shielded warriors braces for impact, while Wolfgang watches, his hand near his mouth in tense anticipation. From his vantage point on the watchtower, he gives the next order with a fierce cry. Burn! A tremendous explosion of fire and light erupts across the battlefield, engulfing the vanguard of the monster horde. Amidst the chaos of the blast, Griselda rallies the adventurers. Don't falter, she commands, reassuring them that the flames are designed to harm only the monsters. Below, the line of warriors holds firm against the tide of shadowy beasts. He notes with satisfaction that the monsters are being contained. On the battlefield, an adventurer shouts his thanks up to the Saboteur command for their support. Despite the success, a flicker of unease crosses Wolfgang's face. The battlefield is a maelstrom of chaotic energy. Even the monsters, like a large wolf beast, recoil in fear not just from the adventurers, but from a relentless barrage of magical explosions detonating all around them. Hans approaches him on the watchtower, voicing his concern that the plan is far too reckless. Wolfgang retorts that they cannot afford any more sacrifices, but his expression turns grim as he realizes the number of monsters is greater than expected. The end, he admits, is nowhere in sight. Suddenly, his breath catches in his throat. A colossal reptilian monster, far larger than the others, erupts from the cave, dwarfing the soldiers below and casting a shadow of dread over the entire battlefield. He stared, aghast, at the colossal winged beast before him. Cursing under his breath, he couldn't believe a monster of that size was part of the horde. Taking a sharp breath, he resolved to fire one more shot. Hans, startled, tried to stop him, insisting that Wolfgang should leave it to him, no matter how much magical power he possessed. But it was too late. A devastating blast of energy erupted, completely obliterating the creature in an instant. In the aftermath of the blast, a voice called out his title, Lord Saboteur. The call came from Hans, who informed the dazed Wolfgang that the creature he had just destroyed was the last one. He assured him that the elite troops could handle the rest. As Griselda and her companion approached, Wolfgang, still catching his breath, could only wonder aloud if the battle was truly finished.